This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Well, hello, Lewis Goodall sitting in for James O'Brien all of this week. I can see Joe has just text saying sexy voice Lewis time. Well, that's a lovely way to start the show. Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate that. We could do with that bit of that every single morning. Anyway, let's go on to more serious matters, shall we? And start the show with a question which I've been very interested in for some time now, which is the question around social media harms, and something that it feels like we are just waking up to as a society. And it's amazing, isn't it, how quickly this sort of culture on this can turn, as if we all just suddenly wake up one day and go, what? We've been doing that? Why have we been allowing that? And in this case, I'm talking about social media for kids. Now, I don't have kids myself, but I know plenty of people that do, and I know from talking to plenty of you over time as well how concerned so many of you, and parents in particular are, and teachers are, about this question. And it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Because you know what? I'm a journalist. I have to spend a lot of time on social media for my sins. And my word, I don't like what it does to my brain. I don't like the fact that it makes my attention span shorter. I don't like the fact that literally when I'm going anywhere, when I'm walking at the bus stop, when I'm on the tube, when I'm just walking along for 30 seconds, I get this twitch, this little bit of spasm in my right hand. Go to a doctor, you say. Well, I probably should, but I know I shouldn't because I know what it's actually about. And it's for reaching for the phone, thinking, oh, what's going on there? And it's just buzzing. And even when I actually am not thinking about it, what happens? It buzzes, it yearns for attention. It's like a really, really obsessive partner, isn't it? And we all know that. We all feel it all of the time. And I didn't grow up with it. I sort of feel like I am lucky that I was part of I was born in 1989, right? So actually, the smartphone didn't really come out until I was nearly finished at university, so 2008, 2009. Certainly I don't really remember anyone having one. Even at university, I remember everyone still having kind of digital cameras and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of feel, in retrospect, fortunate and lucky that when I was a kid, I didn't just have a tablet or a smartphone or something that I could reach for. I'm glad that my attention span was crafted at a time when it was still possible to just basically want to read a book and that be the best entertainment available. And I don't think that's romantic. I don't think that's starry-eyed. I think it's really, really important. I think it's a real foundational thing for future success. There was that heartbreaking report the other day, right? It made me stop in my tracks. I don't know if you heard it. When the Children's Commissioner was saying that they had been studying evidence and gathering evidence and seeing kids trying to open and turn the pages of a book as if it were a smartphone. And you're like, oh my word, what are we creating here? And this worry, this concern, has been crystallised this morning by a really striking intervention from a man called Matt Jukes. Matt Jukes, the head of counter-terrorism, Britain's head of counter-terrorism. So we're not talking about a slightly sort of whingy kind of liberal NGO. We're not talking about a charity. We're not talking about some do-gooder out there. We're talking about the head of counter-terrorism. Security is the thing that's first and foremost in his mind. And he said this morning that the harm created by social media is similar to the cancer caused by smoking for children. Matt Jukes said his team had discussed the policy with colleagues in Australia. And in case you don't know, and I think we'll be hearing a lot more about this, Australia, of course, passed a world first ban on social media use for under 16s last year in 2024. This is him giving evidence to the Times newspaper Crime and Justice Commission. He said, Jukes, that the idea of introducing a similar ban on social media platforms warrants serious attention and should be explored by ministers. Jukes said the surge in young people in the casework of MI5 and counter-terrorism policing had been driven by online radicalisation and had accelerated by isolation during the pandemic. Now, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, was sat in this very studio not so long ago talking to my colleague Nick Ferrari this morning on LBC. And Nick asked her about this parallel being made to smoking in terms of harms it's causing young people.
I am really worried about what some young people are seeing online. This is so different from when you and I were growing up, Nick, and it just feels, it feels, but even compared to 10, 15 years ago, the things that young people are seeing online and the impact that has, I do think that is linked to growing violence that we have seen among young people in different ways. And we've got new changes coming in, the new Online Safety Act from the spring, which means that they have to take down illegal content, new measures later in the year that they have to do more to protect young people from seeing inappropriate material. But nothing can be off the table here. We've got to do more to protect children's safety.
So that's Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary there, saying nothing should be off the table with regards to the prohibition of social media and smartphones potentially for under 16s. Dukes, as I've been saying, Assistant Commissioner at Scotland Yard, leads National Counter-Terrorism Policing, has said for his part that the Online Safety Act that Yvette Cooper references there is necessary but not sufficient. And goes on to say, as I say, that social media should be restricted for children in a similar way to smoking. To quote him exactly, if I give you a parallel with the harm caused by smoking by 1950, it was clear that smoking was causing lung cancer and killing people. But it took decades for governments to decide to regulate not even the supply of tobacco more closely, but even just the advertising of tobacco to young people in places where young people could see it. So that kind of delay of decades is what we can't sustain this challenge. So I really welcome the approach taken by Parliament to the Online Safety Act. This is of all course following. I mean, it's going to be political at any time, isn't it? And there are going to be lots of you out there who are parents and not parents necessarily, who are concerned about this. But it has a particular political edge, doesn't it, over the course of the last couple of weeks or so, following the horrendous evil acts of Axel Rudakabana, who, of course, we know before he killed those gorgeous, precious little girls in Southport, we know that he watched violent and extremist videos on social media before he killed them in an attack on a dance class in Southport last July. And Cooper, I was asked Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, about this on Sunday with Lewis Goodall, the imaginatively named Sunday show with me, Lewis Goodall, on Sunday, and asked her whether Axel Rudakabana, whether those videos had been taken down. As per her request, she had written to these online companies, social media companies, and asked them. And she told me then, and she's confirmed again, that some of the tech giants had refused her requests to remove videos watched by Rudakabana, who was still a minor, of course, at that time, technically, on the morning before the attack, including graphic footage of a high-profile stabbing in Sydney. I mean, I still think we have not properly reckoned with that. These companies, and this is where I want to broaden it out as well, because I do want to talk to you about the effect that social media and on smartphones are having on kids and whether you think it should be prohibited or not. But I want to make it even broader, which goes back to something that we were saying earlier in the week with regards to Elon Musk. I think the asymmetry of power increasingly between these tech companies and nation states is becoming a massive problem. It is becoming a massive problem. It's been a problem for a long time, and I am astonished actually, at the extent to which nation states, including our own, often feel unwilling to properly regulate and properly grapple with that asymmetry of power. When we have got a situation, it could not be better crystallized right now. We have got a situation where the democratically elected government of the fifth or sixth biggest economy in the world, we're not talking about some tiny country out there that has almost no power over anything. Britain's not a world superpower anymore, but it's still a huge marketplace, big economy, powerful country, right? And the Interior Minister, the Home Secretary of that country, has written to some of these companies and asked them to take down material that was seen by an appalling child murderer minutes before he committed his horrendous acts. And what have they done? Nothing. Nothing. I find that astounding. I find it extraordinary that there is not more political outrage from some of the political quarters and parties that are doing all they can to court people like Musk and court his companies and these social media titans. In the one breath, they're talking about how horrendous this guy Rudakabana was and is, and of course he was and is. And in the next breath, there is nothing. Answer comes there none about the material online which helped radicalize him. I find that extraordinary. And I think it speaks to a culture of impunity, a culture of fecklessness, of power without responsibility, the prerogative of the eunuch through the ages, as Stanley Baldwin once said. That is the problem. That is the problem that we have with these companies. And it is the problem that I find extraordinary that politicians are unwilling to grapple with or to deal with. And I think it is about time, to quote Macbeth, that politicians screwed their courage to the sticking place and, not to quote Macbeth, found some bottle to stand up to these people for two reasons. One, the extremism we're seeing that they're just doing nothing about and not enough about. And also because we can see the damage that these companies know are taking place to these kids. If some of these companies didn't need to be regulated or showed more proactivity, actually showed some social responsibility, they would do more to basically ensure that they weren't even being shown to kids. But instead, just like those tobacco advertising companies of old, they basically market themselves for children. But we now know, in terms of the anxiety, in terms of what is happening to these kids' brains, their development, we've got plenty of evidence now to show, as Jukes is alluding to, how damaging this stuff is, and how not just damaging it is for their future lives and for their cognitive development, but also for society as a whole and for the potential for extremism. And that is what I'm worried about. And I want to talk to you about what your experiences are in terms of your own children with social media and smartphones, whether you think there should be a prohibition, but also to that central question about whether it is time that these politicians found some bottle, right, and actually started regulating. I know it's Lady Macbeth, by the way, David Mackay. I know it's Lady Macbeth. I was talking about the play in general. What have you been doing? Going on social media? There's no mystery hour today, mate. I can tell you that for nothing. And let me tell you one other thing as well. If centre-left parties around the world, this is the other thing I can't get my head around. If centre-left parties around the world, Keir Starmer wants an agenda, for example. Sometimes you can feel a politician bereft of an agenda. Well, here's one for him. Take these companies on. These companies are not popular. These companies are often very much considered by parents to be bad actors. They don't give parents the control that they need. They're worried about what they're doing to their kids. There is a long, successful history of progressive parties running against big corporate monoliths, big corporate interests. And this time, you've got the nexus between big rich companies, very, very, very huge liquid assets, really wealthy, massive assets around the world, and tech. That is a hell of a thing to run against, difficult to run against, but it can give your politics cohesion. And that is what Keir Starmer and progressive parties, the Democrats as well, could do and should do around the world, because these tech companies are not popular. So I want to talk to you about your own experiences with children, social media, and whether you agree with me that it is time that progressive parties, any party that is concerned about the future, got some bottle and started to seriously talk, not just about regulating these companies, but potentially breaking these companies up. They are oligopolies, and oligopolies should be broken up. 0345 6060 973, 0345 6060 973. What impact is social media having on us and having on our children? And do you agree that it is leading to radicalization in all sorts of different ways? You're listening to Lewis Goodall, sitting in for James O'Brien all this week here on LBC. I can see some of you saying, where's James? He's not here, folks. He's not here for a whole week. I'm afraid to those 1.5 million listeners, you're going to have to wait a couple more days before the great man is sat back in this chair and put up with me in the meantime. You're listening to Lewis Goodall here on LBC. The time is just coming up to 10:17.
James O'Brien on LBC.
The time is 10:19. We're asking, what impact is social media and smartphones in general having on us, on our brains, particularly in regards to the way kids are and kids act, of course, but we can talk about the effect it has on us as well. I mean, as I've said, I hate what it does to my brain in so many ways. I mean, some parts of it, it's so difficult, isn't it? Because on the one hand, it is so wonderful to basically have in your pocket at all times, like the entire sum of human knowledge, pretty much available to you, that you can just search for and access at any time. And that's wonderful and can be very useful, particularly in quizzes. But at the same time, it's also almost debilitating, isn't it? It's almost like, no matter what you're doing, I mean, how irritating is it? And I've tried to stop myself doing it, but you still find yourself doing it. I try and do it less. I'm doing it less than I used to. It was a New Year's resolution. You know, when you're having a conversation with someone, and, you know, again, you can see their twitchiness in their hand as well. and they're just about to kind of look for their phone, and then before you know where you are, you're having a conversation, and before you know, you're both looking down at this little plate of glass in front of you, this little black mirror in front of you. And like, that is just really depressing. It sort of changes. It means you're so not in the moment at any given time. And part of me sometimes wishes that probably if I had a different job and I wasn't a journalist and I didn't need to be plugged into the kind of news hive mind at all times, I sometimes think maybe I wish I just didn't have to bother with it. And I could just go back and have one of those old Nokia phones that basically you can't do anything. But actually, most of society that now, when it's restaurant reservations, whatever it happens to be, gears you in that direction. So I want to know what impact you think social media and having smartphones in particular is having on you and having on your brain, and what you notice in yourself, what you dislike about it in yourself, what you wish you could exorcise from it, and your children as well, and whether indeed, as I say, it's time to break up the big social media companies. 0345 6060973. Michael says, sexy voice Lewis Goodall. Surely you're the first person from the West Midlands to receive such a compliment. Mike, you ever heard Jasper Carrot? I wouldn't have thought so. Joe Salmon says, I think more pressure should be put on the tech companies. All smartphones have parental controls built into them. If these phones come out of the shop with all controls enabled and can only be removed by linking to a parent account or proof of age, this could make smartphones much safer. We have family sharing set up on our devices, and me and my wife can track and lock down what our apps are and can be used. Parents have a responsibility to control what their children are doing. It's not safe in this day and age to give a child unfiltered access to the internet. Joe in Mansfield. Let's talk to Jean, who is in Kettering in Northamptonshire. Jean.
Hello, Lewis.
Hello, morning.
Music to my ears to hear you speaking this morning. Absolutely.
That's nice to hear.
I've got 18 grandchildren.
Oh, wow. 18?
Several teenagers.
How'd you keep track?
I've got 5 children of my own, so I couldn't complain when they had several, could I?
No, I suppose not. I suppose not.
But seriously, I was out with two of them. I took two of them out to dinner last night, and I was talking to them about their phones and what they're watching, and the violence and the stabbings. 2 of them are still at school, and they were very scared. But they can't moderate, they can't regulate themselves. The government has to do it, and it was wonderful hear you saying the politicians need to get some, and get cracking. They can do it, and it's our children, and it's their future, and we never, ever experienced anything like what they're looking at. And I'm talking about pornography and all the other stuff that they're being influenced by. So well done, 10 out of 10.
Gene, what effect? I mean, you've got quite the control study there, because you've got 18 grandkids of different ages. What's your impression of kind of the effect it has on them?
Well, it moods. And going down rabbit holes, the conspiracy theorists and all that sort of stuff. It's all linked, Lewis, and thinking Trump is the best thing since sliced bread, the very older boys. And
oh, really? Well, your grandsons love Trump.
They said, well, 2 of them do, yes.
Yeah.
We were having a discussion about it, and I said, tell me what's good about it. And, well, it's the masculinity thing, and the Andrew Tate's. It's all a big piece, on the internet for the children. And I have massive concerns, and I feel it's my responsibility to keep talking about it. But I want the government to do something about it. And it's just wonderful listening to you talk and not making any excuses, Lewis, saying they need to get their fingers out and they need to get it sorted. And starting today.
How do you think they'd react, Gene, your grandkids, your 18 grandkids, if the ones who are, say, under 16, a la Australia, were told, I'm afraid your smartphones have got to go? What do you think their reaction would be?
I think they would struggle at first, but there would be a relief. It's like banning certain things, giving children, concrete to knock against sometimes. They don't like it because it hurts their head, but they stop doing it after a while because they realise, and they will all be in the same club. Parents just can't say, I'm going to ban my child. I was talking to one of the parents last night about, she said, well, I can't do that because every other kid's got one, so he's going to be out on his own. And it's perfectly acceptable for her to say that because but on the internet there are parents getting together, trying to do something about it. But for God's sake, let's just get on with it.
Gene, really grateful to you. Really, there you go. Well, that's a hell of a control study there. 18 grandchildren. Really interesting what Gene's saying about Trump's popularity with Gen Z in particular. It's a really big phenomenon, something we can talk about another time. Pierre is in Tower Hamlets. Pierre, morning.
Morning, hello.
Morning. You're a parent yourself, Pierre?
Yes, I am. To a 13-year-old and a a 10-month-old, so I'm always joking, saying that by the time the 10-month-old gets to primary school, hopefully all phones are banned, and he does not have to go through being an iPad baby, as we call them, and the journey of social media. But I'm all for banning social media for children. I just think it's robbing them from their childhood, and I don't think it's just not positive at all. I mean, from my point of view, I know teenagers naturally go through mood swings, but I find they're even more intense. She's constantly hooked on her phone. I mean, she can spend hours and hours on the phone, and I think something that some parents don't realise, because I've spoken to a few parents about it, and some parents are like, yeah, I've let my child go on Snapchat and TikTok, it's harmless, and then you've got other parents that are very extreme. But I think we don't realise that there's I guess as a parent, you try to, I guess, control your children's environment, obviously, to ensure that they're getting the best. But the digital world sometimes can be so far from your reach. You almost
overwhelming.
Don't know. Yeah, you just don't know what's going on. I mean, parent control didn't even work for me when I tried to set it up. When we finally let my daughter on TikTok. I'm
really interested, Pete, that you're the second person now. Jean said the same thing about the kind of the impact that it has on kids' moods. Just tell me more about that. You think it is? You think it does affect their mood, their anxiety, and so on?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's even just when sometimes we go out on day trips, and it's almost like, I guess you've got kind of mood swings, and then you've just got kind of anger towards just random things and this really heavy attitude, and you can't get them. So if you say, "Oh, I'm taking your phone," it becomes a massive, massive, massive scene. Every time I turn around, she's always on her phone, and I tell her, "You're on your phone again." She says, "Oh well, I'm not. I'm doing something important." And I'm thinking, well, how can you can't be on this thing 24/7 constantly doing important things.
How do you think they'd react? Same final question to you, Pierre, that I asked Jean. How do you think, say the government turns around and says, right, smartphone ban for the under 16, how would your two react?
You know, it's interesting because I think she's a sensible girl, so I'll give her credit for that. So I think she would probably be really upset at first. I mean, she does say they're too far in to have a ban. She says, well, hopefully by the time the ban comes, I'll be 16 and it won't apply to me anyway. So that's how much she wants to stay on social media. But I think it will be difficult at first. But she also really loves her activities. She loves being out with her friends. She loves the real world even more, I would say. She loves, gardening. So I think if we give them other things to do and we allow them to also explore the real world, they'll probably realise that it's probably much better than the world of social media.
Pierre, really grateful to you. Really, really interesting. Thanks so much. Lewis, another Lewis is in Nottingham. Lewis, from one Lewis to another. Morning.
Hi, morning. I'm calling because I've had social media in the past. I came off it a few months ago because I was going through. We're going through mental health issues because of our daughter's illness, and the impression that I had, or we had, was that having 24/7 access to other people and putting likes or comments, it gives that false sense of impression that you're always in contact with people, and then when you're going through hard times is when you have no one, and people assume that everything's okay with you. So yes. As an adult that's been going through that, coming off the social media was the best thing I could have done. I miss it.
Lewis, what effect has it had? How do you feel by comparison to before?
So let's talk about the prior. So prior, when I was using social media, I did have the impression that, I had, hundreds of people that I could count on. But then when I needed those people, probably only a handful would be the ones that I really was in contact with. So that false sense of having a lot of people to be around is not true.
Do you feel less worried, less anxious, more present?
A lot less anxious. I know who I can count with. I don't know how I had time for social media as well.
Right.
Looking backwards.
Is there anything you miss, though? Because we should be careful. I mean, there are things about social media which are positive and are good and allow people to feel connected and so on.
Yeah.
Is there anything you miss about it?
Nothing, to be fair.
Really? Okay.
Because even my partner, she still has Instagram, and she sends me, or she wants to send me stuff that, I do find it funny, memes or videos.
Yes. Do you feel a bit like left out of the culture at all?
I don't think so.
No. I suppose you wouldn't know, would you?
No.
Ignorance
one of
is
my
bliss.
friends was asking, we posted this photo with, my husband and our son, and how do you keep up to that? I'm like, I know you're all right, or I know that you're not all right, because we keep in touch via text, not via social media. So it's a very societal problem that we're so reliant on Instagram or Facebook. And I see more negatives than positives. And then I have a 2-year-old daughter, so I'm now thinking, when she's a teenager, how the hell is she going to cope with all this? So, yeah.
Lewis, really, really interesting. Really grateful to you and insight, and actually really interested to talk to other people if they have decided to become abstemious, I suppose, with regards to social media and with smartphones. Have you given it up? What impact has it had on your life? Is there anything you miss about it? What happened when you took the decision to come off social media and the impact that it may have had on your social life? It's really interesting thing about the popular culture, like the number of memes, as Lewis was saying there, and kind of gags and tweets and stuff that sort of I get sent. I suppose I probably would feel a little bit left out of those sort of things. And that's the. But then, do you really care? Because once you're out of it, you're out of it. What impact is social media and smartphones having on us? And what has happened to you if you have given them up? 0345 6060 0345 6060 Particularly interested on the impact on children, if you've got any as well. Really, really interesting conversation. Lots more to come here with Lewis Goodall sitting in for James O'Brien all this week at 10:32. Let's get the very latest LBC News headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's just going up to 10:36. Lots of text coming in, including from Nate. Says, Lewis, good topic. I'm worried about my kids. They don't want to read a book for pleasure anymore. This also goes back to your show on Monday. Musk and people like that are radicalising people through their phones' algorithm. I completely agree with that, and it's a huge part of our contemporary politics, Nate. Daisy says, I think the mood changes come down to the fact for kids that it is an addiction. Many other forms of addiction, e.g. alcohol, cigarettes, gambling, are illegal until someone's an adult. Growing up and developing with an addiction to their phones is damaging these kids, their hardwiring of their brains. It becomes tied to their identity. They feel they literally cannot live without it, and who can blame them? That's exactly what this company wants. And Carol says, Lewis, I gave up on social media 6 months ago. Check in with the news a few times a day. There's so much undiluted nonsense everywhere you look. I don't need social media as well. Carol in Norwich, probably a lucky woman living a peaceful life, no doubt. We're going to take more of your calls very shortly. First, though, I want to turn to this story, really important story for a lot of our listeners in particular. Grenfell Tower is to be demolished. Bereaved families are understood to have been told by the Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner. This has, of course, been a long-running question in West London. So many families there affected. Lots of disagreement among affected families about what should be done about the remnants of the tower, or the structure, what is remaining of the structure of the tower. Some families believing it should remain in place as a permanent memorial, others feeling that it is an unsightly and uncomfortable reminder of the tragedy and horror that there was. LBC's reporter at the site is Guy Stewart in West London, in Kensington. Guy, a controversial topic and a difficult day, really, whichever side of that question for the families they sit on.
Of course, but the concern we've been hearing this morning is whether the trust of those bereaved families and survivors has been broken by the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. I mean, it's been pretty fragile over this long and traumatising process because of failures that, of course, were confirmed by the Grenfell inquiry. Grenfell United, one of the groups that was in the meeting with Angela Rayner, claims survivors have been totally ignored, saying it's disgraceful and unforgivable what's been decided. But another group, Grenfell Next of Kin, well, they welcomed the decision, finally getting a decision about Grenfell's future, and they've called it deeply sensitive. Emma Dent-Coad was the Labour MP for Kensington when the fire happened in June 2017. She's spoken to people in that meeting and she's been giving me her reaction.
There's massive upset. I would say for some people it's absolutely visceral that it should go. For some people it's visceral that it should stay. So I think the main issues, as I understand it today, people don't want anyone to forget what happened. So it's the memorialisation of the site. And it's the justice aspect as well. I think if those things had been dealt with, maybe it would have been less painful, but it feels like nothing's happening.
Nearly 8 years have passed since the devastating fire that ripped through the tower, accelerated by that dangerous cladding. It killed 72 people who are remembered here at a temporary memorial wall at the foot of the burnt-out building. I mean, Lewis, just dozens upon dozens of handwritten notes, green love hearts and pictures of those loved ones. Our listeners will remember a report last autumn from the inquiry said decades of failure from both governments and private companies was responsible for their deaths. And while ministers are working to introduce the recommendations from that inquiry, families are still awaiting justice. There is that huge Metropolitan Police investigation continuing. So it's why dismantling Grenfell may be too soon for some. Nevertheless, the engineering advice given to the government is the fact that this structure is just no longer safe. The promise, though, has always been to listen to survivors when deciding next steps. Home Secretary Yvette has been speaking to LBC.
I think Angela Rayner has been meeting with Grenfell survivors and families for a very long time. I know that she is continuing to do so. I think that's her priority, having further discussions with them today.
It was consulted, all people were consulted?
I know that it's been something that's a huge personal priority for her, because this is just so devastating, everything that's happened.
There's rumblings of an official statement from the government tomorrow, and that appears to be the key thing here. Questions needing answered, but I understand nothing will happen to Grenfell Tower until after the 8th anniversary. That is, of course, happening in June.
Guy Stewart there, LBC's reporter at the site of Grenfell Tower in Kensington in West London. Big day, as I say, for the families there, and a difficult one for Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner to navigate. We are talking about the effect that social media is having on our children and is having on us. Smartphones in particular. It's not just social media, really. It is the smartphone, because, as I was saying, I use social media, particularly Twitter, X, and different things for news purposes, but half the time it's just, WhatsApp. The very fact that you can kind of the thing that you can do now, where if you're not around for like an hour and you have a loved one or a friend or someone, and you just have kind of like increasingly frantic messages from them going, where are you? Oh, you haven't responded, etc., etc. Which would have been, I think it's hard for us to even get into the mindset, right, that even 10, 15 years ago, that would have just been so weird. Like the idea that you just have to be constantly online. On WhatsApp, that's the key, isn't it? That's the crucial one. Online. You're online. People want you the entire time, and they expect you to, and that does a weird thing to the brain and to the mind. Let's talk to Rob, who is down in Launceston in Cornwall, a wonderful Cornwall. Rob, morning.
Morning, Lewis. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. You've got an experience, a very tragic experience, I think, related to this question.
Yeah, I think this whole discussion this morning, something that needs to be brought into this is the rise in children's mental health from social media and the rise in children tragically taking their own lives. Because if you look at social media and you look at the rise of children's mental health problems over the last 20 years, it's directly associated with social media, because you've got a format telling them what they should look like, what they should wear, how fat they should be, how skinny they should be, and everything else. And there is so much pressure.
And cyberbullying as well.
Cyberbullying, which I'm very aware of, because unfortunately for me, Lewis, nearly 4 years ago, on the 12th of February, my 16-year-old son tragically made a decision to take his own life. And part of that was messages sent by Snapchat and other social media formats. And I think social media companies need to do a lot more, because it doesn't matter what way you dress it up. Social media, Facebook, Instagram, is damaging our kids' mental health. And I don't think enough is spoken about this subject. I really don't. And I think we need to look more into that. We really, really do.
Rob, I'm so sorry to hear that, first of all. An absolutely terrible story. And our hearts go out to you here at LBC. Would you mind just... Can you tell us a little bit more about the circumstances around that, and why it is that social media in particular contributed to his tragic death?
Yeah, Ethan had some issues going on with a few people, and then he started to receive horrible messages via Snapchat, WhatsApp, and stuff like that.
Bullying messages.
Right. Which increased his anxiety, which increased his mental health, which then led to Eve making a decision which has had tragic circumstances and which has completely and utterly destroyed us as a family. It absolutely destroyed us from inside out, and we will never be the same. Life will never be the same. And social media has a huge role to play in protecting our children, because over the last 20 years or so, since the rise of social media, they have not done enough to protect children. And it doesn't matter what way you dress it up, social media is damaging our children. Social media is killing people. And people may not like to hear that, but that is the harsh reality of social media, Lewis. It really, really is. And just a caveat, Lewis, I was heavily involved in social media over the last few years, politics, what was going on in Gaza. And this Christmas, I made a vow to myself to step away from social media this year and stop engaging. And you know what? In the 5 weeks since I've done that, I feel happier.
Really?
So I'm a grown adult. So you can imagine what that's doing to children.
Yep.
Me not engaging with stuff on social media since in 2025 in the first 5 weeks has increased my happiness and stopped me feeling so down and depressed by what I'm reading, what pictures I'm looking at, and everything else. Now put that onto a child and we can see why children are suffering and why social media is increasing mental health problems in children. And the government and social media tech companies need to do a lot more, because they are not protecting our children, Lewis.
And Rob, were you aware of what was going on at the time, or did it just come to light after the tragedy of his death?
It come to light after it. It come to light after everything started to come out then. And that's when we found out. And yeah, it's certainly opened my eyes, and I've been quite involved working with other charities and bits and pieces over the last 4 years. And they've all highlighted the damage that social media is doing to children's mental health, and we need to do more to protect them.
And that's the problem, isn't it? Because as a parent, you don't necessarily know what's going on in that little box, and you want to respect their privacy and so on. But then all of this is this secret world that you're not aware of and can't be aware of, really.
Can we? And it's like, if we go back 30 years, you can imagine a child is being bullied at school. When that child comes home after school, whilst they're worried about the next day, there is a small amount of respite for them. Yeah. Nowadays, there is no respite. They come home from school, they're hounded via Facebook, via Instagram, via Snapchat, via WhatsApp. There is no absolute break for these children now. So if they're being bullied, the bullying is now 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. What do you think that is going to do to a child?
Is that what was happening to Ethan, do you think?
There was some of that going on, yes, there was, Lewis. And that was a contributing factor in Eve making the decision that he did.
Rob, thank you so much for sharing your story and Ethan's story. Because I think that it completely illustrates and makes real what we're talking about here, and the damage that can be wrought by this stuff. And although, of course, look, bullying's always existed, these problems have always existed, I don't think there can be any doubt that cyberbullying, but also just the kind of pressure that kids are under, having that thing in their pockets the whole time, the kind of social pressure that creates, I just think that it is clear that I don't really have a proper conception of it. And I don't think anybody who hasn't experienced it can. And I think that we've been too willing to simply look the other way as adults in this situation and think, well, maybe it's just like the complaints like television. It's not like television when people said, that was giving kids square eyes in the 60s and 70s and all that, because you couldn't take the television with you. It was just for a couple of hours a day. This goes everywhere in their pockets. Look, I'm a real libertarian about a lot of things. I think government should let people make up their own decisions. But that's people, adults. I'm much more of an authoritarian when it comes to children, because they're just not in a position to be able to make that decision for themselves. And Rob's story really brings that to life. talking about what impact social media and smartphones are having on us. And if you've given it up, I want to hear from you about what happened to you when you took the decision to come off it or to abandon your smartphone or social media. 0345 60 60 973. Can see a lot of love coming in, quite rightly, for Rob in Launceston, sharing his story extremely bravely. You're listening to Lewis Goodall, sitting in for James O'Brien all this week on LBC. The time's 10:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 10:51. After 11 o'clock, we're going to be talking about something that Kemi Badenoch has said. No, don't turn it off the radio. Kemi Badenoch has suggested that it should be harder for people who are resident in Britain to get British citizenship. I don't want to have a boring conversation about people talking about having predictable views about immigration. I'm sure occasionally we've heard that before. I want to have a conversation about what it's actually like trying to get British citizenship, because there's an idea that somehow it's really easy. It really isn't easy. So I want to hear from you if you've actually gone through that process and your experiences of it, dealing with the Home Office and so on. 0345 60 60 973 if you want to be part of that conversation. For now, we're talking about the effect that social media and smartphones are having on us. Let's talk to Geraint, who's in Cardiff. Geraint.
Oh, hi there. Morning, Lewis.
Good morning.
I'm a first-time caller, so you'll have to bear with me. I'll try and get my points across.
No, you're very welcome aboard.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point, I don't necessarily think I'm right, but just one point of view to throw in the mix, is that personal responsibility as parents. You summarised quite well before the break about the social pressure of the phones in the pockets, but we are the people buying them for our children. I mean, I'm a former secondary school teacher.
Right.
And children 11 and 12 years of age going into year 7, it was very much, they had to have a phone. That was the next big step. Their parents would buy them a phone. And I would regularly do, supervise children. If it's raining outside, we'd be indoors at lunchtime, break time. And all of the children are sat staring at their screens. No one's communicating with each other, just basic skills as a child. When you go to high school, you want to be able to do. And I'm not saying this is the answer, and I'm not blaming parents. There's lots of social media companies need to do. But we don't have to put the phone in their hands till we feel comfortable knowing they can use it.
I suppose it's a great point, Geraint, and I think, I'm a big believer generally that it's very easy to just look to the state the entire time and say the state should do this or ban that and whatever, and personal responsibility is really important, so I agree with you. I suppose the difficulty, I can understand if you're a parent, the difficulty, of course, is that you've got a first mover problem, haven't you? Because, as long as some kids have it, I can completely understand the pressure for a parent, for those kids, for their kids not to be left out of stuff and left out of the kind of communication and all that sort of thing. So I can understand why parents might look to the state to say, actually, to level the playing field and just say no one's having it.
Yeah, of course. And I'm a parent myself, and I've got a daughter who's 6, so I might eat my words in a few years when she goes to high school. However, I walk my daughter to school who's 6 years old, and there's children just staring at their phones walking to school.
Of that sort of age?
That's in primary school age as well.
Yeah,
and I'm sure every listener who drops their child at school will probably see that. And it's just scary. It scares me. And my daughter doesn't know what Snapchat is, but she's saying the word Snapchat when she comes home because there's children on the yards talking about it and using their phones. And I just think we've got a little bit of responsibility we need to take. And that was my point, really.
Geraint, really grateful to you, and an important point as well. It's a transformation, isn't it? I mean, actually, we just don't reckon with it enough. It's a transformation. It's happened so quickly, so rapidly. Janine is in Chester. Janine, good morning.
Hi, Lewis.
Hello. You're the mum of a 9-year-old, is that right?
I am. I'm about to embark on this horrific stage.
Right, okay.
And basically, the conversations have come up with the 9-year-old, so she's in year 4.
Right.
She's saying some of her friends have got mobile phones. Can she have one? And, I then started looking into what is the impact of smartphones? And I found the smartphone-free childhood movement, found so much information off of that website. And I then forwarded that information onto the primary school that my daughter goes to.
Yeah.
Now, this smartphone-free movement, even composes the emails for you. So it's a really nice way of, approaching the principal, etc., to highlight issues. I did not hear a peep back from the principal. So I forwarded on a second time to say, did you get this? Absolutely nothing. Then I think it was last week or the week before, they sent out a weekly bulletin. And in that bulletin, they said, and in their words, they said they've got no issues with mobile phones being used during the day, as has been reported in the media.
Right.
So I kind of saw that as a bit of a clickbait. So I emailed the principal, and I just said, I take it that you guys really don't see as smartphones being an issue for children, even though you've got all this evidence that has been sent to you. Their response to me was that, you know, what did they say? They said that they've got measures in place to help deal with child mental health within the school. And in year 5 and year 6, they've got someone in that comes and talks to them about e-safety. So I responded and I just said, all that I'm asking you for, because I know it's not a law, but is just to address the parents of children who are in year 4 or below and ask them to maybe suggest an alternative.
Yes.
Or point them to some information, you know, like a smartwatch, something that you can't access.
And what do you think you're going to do,
media.
Ginny? You coming up to this, what do you think you're going to do?
I am like, the scariest thing is those parents in the WhatsApp groups, right? Honestly. But the school isn't helping me. So the best I can do is take the bull by the horn, post in the WhatsApp group and say, guys, like, what are we going to do? Like, are you aware of this? Or,
okay.
But they are scary. They are, because some have already got phones and you know, they've said, well, you know, that kids need to access information because they don't see their father on a regular basis. So what do you think we should do?
Janine, grateful to you. I want to get David in, who's in Barnet. David, you've got an experience of this, I think.
Yes, so I'm a head of English in a school, an ultra-Orthodox school in London.
Right.
And being not ultra-Orthodox myself, I'm...
Just to be clear, listen, an ultra-Orthodox Jewish school.
Yes. And it's... so what they have is basically none of the parents have smartphones themselves, none of the children do, and it is a choice, and it's not necessarily for everyone. I would never be able to live like that. But I really respect it.
Yes.
And I actually see it as very, very positive for the children in that aspect.
What effect do you think it has?
So I think for example, with where I come from, with the children that I see around me, my friends, kids and everything, their attention span is quite short. And I'm finding they're always looking to go on their tablets, go on their smartphones, speaking about what's going on, what they're watching. With the kids in my school, we never have that issue. We have a kind of interest in reading, a lot of positive from the parents and to the children. So a lot of the children are able to get their parents' attention for longer. I think it's great personally. It's a way of living that is kind of lost right now with 2025.
And how old are the kids?
So the kids range. It's a primary school, and there's it goes up to about 12 years old, and the children just they'll for example use their parents' Nokia or the house phone, but they'll never actually ever touch a smartphone.
Do you think that it would work? So for primary school, do you think it would work for secondary school kids?
I think once you get to secondary age, you want to have. I think within this community, they don't even go on to ever have a smartphone.
Right, okay.
It's within their culture. But I think it would work for a few years. You know, year 7 to 9, maybe, I would say, is a kind of a time where children go on social media and they're, seeing a lot of damaging content.
And what about you, David? Do you think you could give it up yourself?
Well, I don't think I could, just because of every day and I'm kind of...
It's hard. It's like you're just getting a plane or anything. I mean, everything's geared towards it, isn't it? It is harder than it might seem.
Exactly. It's so difficult. But eventually, I definitely have cut down my social media use and probably my smartphone use since joining this, I'm joining the school.
Probably wise. David in Barnet, thank you so much, and grateful to you. Really, really interesting hour of the show, I think, and really it's a conversation that we don't have enough, just taking a moment to actually reflect on this absolutely massive transformation that's happening in our lives over the last 20 years or so. When we look back historically, forget all of the froth and the politics, it will be the smartphone. I think historians that say define this age. We're going to move on now, though, in true social media or smartphone fashion, to another story, and that is the Conservative Party pledging to tighten immigration rules after reform topped a landmark poll for the first time earlier this week. Kemi Badenoch is pledging to double the length of time an immigrant needs to have been in UK before claiming indefinite leave to remain or for citizenship. I want to talk to you if you've gone through this process, if you've tried to become a citizen, just how hard or easy is it?
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:03, listening to Lewis Goodall here on LBC, sitting in for James O'Brien all this week. So many of you wanted to talk about that social media question, smartphone question. I think definitely a subject we must return to, and something that it still amazes me, as I say, does not get more attention from mainstream politics, particularly when you've got a party that's looking to do things on the cheap. Guess what? You can regulate these companies entirely for free. And if this conversation is anything to go by, there'd be a lot of political support out there for it in the country. But as I say, we're moving on now to something Kemi Badenoch has said. And of course, as you know, Kemi Badenoch, since she became Conservative leader, she's kept her powder dry on all manner of things. Says she doesn't want to be rushed into policy. She says it feels like she's being asked to open a restaurant in 4 years' time and being told that she has to provide the menu immediately. Well, she has filled in at least the first amuse-bouche on that menu at the very, very top of what is available. And she is saying, guess what, that she has a policy on, guess what, immigration. Who'd have thought it, with Reform topping a poll and beating the Conservatives into third place just this week. She's saying that migrants who are unemployed or in low-paid jobs will face being forced to leave the UK under plans being drawn up by her. The right to citizenship, she says, and permanent residency should only go to those who've demonstrated a real commitment to the UK. That is why, she said, that the next Conservative government would double the length of time before people can qualify for indefinite leave to remain, which is basically, as it says, basically you get to stay in the country for as long as you like, from 5 to 10 years. Under the proposal as well, legal migrants applying for indefinite leave to remain. So remember, these are people legally in the country. They're not illegal migrants. They've been accepted in, they've been given a visa, they're doing a job, whatever it happens to be. Under this proposal, legal migrants applying for ILR, indefinite leave to remain, would have to navigate far stricter criteria than they're currently faced with if their application is to succeed. They would have had to be, among other things they say, quote, net contributors to the British economy over the previous 10 years. That's up from 5 years at present. The tax they must have paid much more than cover their and their children's costs to the state, if they have children. They would also have had to have worked and not claimed benefits or used social housing in that decade. They're also going to proposing to increase the length of time that a migrant, a legal migrant, is allowed before they can apply for citizenship as well. Now, this is an interesting thing, because I think that behind the kind of premise of what Badenoch is doing, and what I don't really want to do, because I'm not sure that it really is much valued use of my time nor of your time. I'm not sure I really want to kind of get into a conversation about whether we think this will sort of deter migrants or whether it's right in terms of deterring migrants and all of that sort of thing. Because let's be honest, for all of the talk that we have in this country about needing a debate on immigration, my word, we have a debate on immigration possibly more than any other subject under the sun. I mean, look at it by comparison to the thing that we were just talking about in the last hour, social media regulation and the effect it's having on all of our minds and our kids' minds. We talk about that despite the fact that it's a far more present, omnipresent thing in our lives. We talk about it so seldom by comparison to the discussion of the intricacies of the migration system and Tier 2 visas and this, that and the other. So I don't really want to talk about that. But it did get me and did get us thinking here about actually the process of actually navigating becoming a migrant and becoming a citizen in this country. Because I think that there is a kind of assumption behind what Badenoch is saying there. And again, I don't really want to get into the rights and wrongs of the prescription that she's giving. But there's an assumption behind the diagnosis, I think, that people who are in the country navigating the citizenship process, navigating the ILR, indefinite leave to remain process, that it's sort of a bit soft touch, that it's easy, that it's too flexible, too lenient at the moment for people. And I've done a lot of reporting with people navigating this process over the years. And I have to say that from my experience, it is anything but. And I always say the Home Office is a funny old department in British politics, because it's a department which is very important, which on some level we all rely on, because it's the department which provides the kind of basics of the state, right? It's like security, it's police, it's all of that sort of thing. But all being well, if you're a British citizen and you're law-abiding, you don't have much to do with it. It doesn't really interfere or interact with you very much, as opposed to other government departments which might, like the Department for Work and Pensions or whatever it happens to be, Department for Education, Health. But the Home Office kind of ideally leaves us alone as citizens. But if you're not a citizen, if you're a migrant, then you have a lot to do with the Home Office. And I always say that from my experience, if the average British person had much to do with the Home Office, we'd have abolished it years ago. Because it is a very, very problematic department. And the way that it treats people, it's highly, highly bureaucratic. It's highly, highly procedural. It's highly, highly computer says no a lot of the time. Again, this is the experience from my reporting of it. And my experience certainly is, and this is what I want to talk to you about, is that in terms of the experience of becoming a citizen or getting indefinite leave to remain or whatever it happens to be, it is not especially generous, and it is complicated, and it is bureaucratic, and it is particularly hardwired, to be honest, to get you to leave, right? And I think we saw that most vividly demonstrated, didn't we, in terms of that kind of like cold bureaucracy, the sort of cold hand bureaucracy, the computer says no thing, most vividly demonstrated during Windrush and the Windrush scandal. And then you'd had people who had been here for decades, but because they didn't have the right bit of paperwork and this bit or the other, ended up being treated terribly and discriminated against. And I suppose my worry about this, if it were to be taken seriously, or the sort of worry about this sort of adding to sort of the pressures around becoming a citizen, all those sorts of things, is that actually that just makes it worse. And it makes it even more demeaning. That's often one of my experience interviewing people who are going through this stuff, that they can feel somewhat humiliated and demeaned by the way that these government departments treat them. Well, sometimes we're talking about people who have been here for decades, paying taxes for decades. But you have that kind of cold hand of the state, as I say. Sometimes I've had experience of people saying it's humiliated them and they felt awful about it. They didn't know if they wanted to become a citizen. So as I say, I want to talk to you about your experiences of gaining citizenship in this country. How easy, maybe it has been much easier than the people I've interviewed in the past, or difficult has it been? And does Badenoch's rhetoric, does it make you feel that your position, how does it make you feel about your position in the country, how you're valued in the country? And do you sometimes have that sense that you have to continually justify yourself in society? Want these experiences on 0345 6060 973. 0345 6060 973. When I try and have a more conversation for people who will never have interacted with the Home Office and going through this process, because people like me, British citizens, we don't have to. We get it from birth. And I think sometimes it's really useful to actually hear from the horse's mouth for people who've actually navigated it for the rest of us, because there is this assumption in politics, it's quite crass assumption, it's all terribly easy. Well, talking about hearing it from the horse's mouth, let's listen to Kemi Badenoch herself talking about this policy. This is her talking earlier today.
We have been giving out leave to remain and citizenship that we now cannot sustain our public services. Not enough housing to go around. People can't get a GP appointment. And what I find is that every time I'm talking about how we need to bring migration numbers down, we always focus on the edge case of, well, how exactly will this bit have an impact and so on. And we create almost a chilling effect of doing anything at all because it's all too difficult. This is how we've got into this mess in the first place, in my view.
Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader there. I mean, of course, as ever with immigration, I don't really want to get into this exactly, but of course, as ever with immigration, there isn't much engagement with the trade-offs. I mean, Kemi Badenoch there, so talking about public services. Of course, many of the people who are coming to work in the public services and usually are net contributors because they are usually younger and don't draw on the services of the state. So, as ever, it's a complicated topic. I mean, I always think that actually, we're talking here, or Kemi Badenoch's talking here, about potentially making it harder for people to gain citizenship. I always think, and I'm surprised this isn't again more of a discussion within the Labour government, you could make an argument to say it should be easier to get citizenship. If you're here and you've been contributing and you've been paying taxes for year after year after year, then shouldn't you get to come a point where you automatically gain citizenship and you get voting rights? My wife happens to be Norwegian, and I'm always sort of surprised. I mean, she's here, she's paying taxes, she was a student here, she paid a lot of international student finance and so on, fees. And, she doesn't get to vote in a general election. She doesn't get to even vote in a local election like other European citizens do. And she's still paying council tax, she's still paying tax. No taxation without representation doesn't go very far in this country. And I'm always amazed. There's a big constituency out there, particularly of European citizens who, of course, now have indefinite leave to remain in the country. Always surprised that it's not more of a conversation about making it easier for them to gain citizenship. And yet the whole conversation is about making it harder rather than making it easier. So I think this is a conversation that is important to have. And as I say, really want to hear from you as to if you've navigated this this Byzantine system, as it often is, this complicated bureaucracy. Is it as easy as Kemi Badenoch appears to be suggesting it is? And it's not just Kemi Badenoch. This is the whole tenor, very often, of policy with regards to this, or the tenor of the conversation and of the rhetoric, which is that Britain is a soft touch and we need to constantly make everything harder, more forms, more bureaucracy, more proof that you've done X, Y, and Z. Let's have a conversation and hear from people who've actually done it so we can all learn something from it. How have you found your experiences of gaining citizenship or indefinite leave to remain in this country? And would you do it again? Was it worth the hassle? Was it worth the money? You have to do that little test, of course, where you have to remember when Magna Carta was signed, 1215, if anyone's doing their revision. 0345 6060 973 0345 6060 973 and you will get through on the lines if you call that number. You're listening to Lewis Goodall sitting in for James O'Brien all this week on LBC. We're also going to be talking a little bit more about Gaza in the next half an hour or so of the show, and talking to a former Prime Minister of Israel, hearing what he has to say about the Trump quote-unquote peace plan, which already seems to have to some extent at least fallen apart before it even got going. Lewis Goodall on LBC. The time is just coming up to 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
We've just gone at 11:17. Aldo has texted in to say, "Morning, Lewis. I've just applied for citizenship in the UK. However, I've lived here for 26 years and decided that in order to protect my future here, it's best to get citizenship. Firstly, it cost me £1,630. Wow, plus other costs, 50 quid for the test, 50 quid to scan my paperwork. Recommended this as it can be difficult. So far, the easiest part of the process has been the Britishness test. I'm Italian and have indefinite leave to remain. However, I can't trust the government to not go full Trump at some point in the future." Gosh, that is sad. People having to think that way. Assad said, "The question is, as parties compete in a competition to the bottom, who stands up for decency? Labour is for stringent immigration. The rest are even more insane. Who's making a case for immigration?" And Carles says, "Hi Lewis, I took my British citizenship test a couple of years ago. I was shocked at my ceremony when I arrived to it and I had to wait for the ceremony to start. What shocked me was that from 15 people there waiting, half of them couldn't speak English. I can't understand how they were granted the right without being able to speak, how these people can apply without being able to speak English. Can anyone explain that to me?" Seems weird, Carlos, given that you'd have to fill in all the forms and do the test online, but I don't know. Let's talk to Muiz, who is in Woolwich. Muiz, I think you've got some experience of this yourself, Muiz.
Lewis, how much time have you got?
Well, let's see. Depends how interesting you are, Muiz, of course. No, I'm only joking.
My
Go.
story is unique.
Okay.
I came here at the age of 15 to year 10 with my mama to join my dad. And then they divorced, and time to reapply again. Then they didn't give us because my dad has remarried. They're like, nope, that's not going to happen. You came here to depend on your dad. Your dad is remarried. That's the story. But let's leave that there. I wasn't able to get nothing. Went through secondary school, went through college, and out of college, I couldn't go uni, obviously. So I had a girlfriend, met a British woman, had a daughter, 2016. And my wife gave birth, and we're about to apply. And they're like, oh, the only thing you can do is apply on your daughter because that's the you cannot, under human right, you cannot separate a dad from the mom, from the child. So that's what we did. So they gave me 2.5 years on my daughter. 2019, I married my wife, switched it onto the marriage. And from then on, we've been applying 2.5 years, thinking, okay, 5 years married to a British woman, then you can apply for your indefinite. So that has happened. My marriage was 5 years last year.
Right.
I applied for indefinite last year, and they told me, nope, you're on the 10 years route of marriage. I'm like, what? I had done the live in UK test and everything, passed it. Eddie, like,
and paid money to do that?
$5,000, including the lawyer fee.
Wow.
If you're not from England, you got to pay for NHS separately. You got to pay the visa fee separately. And guess what? And I've got to pay again to have my biometric done as well. So literally, I don't know what the British government is actually doing with all the money they're collecting, but that's not even the issue. And bringing it further is like before you used to be able to apply 3 months before, Louis, so that and they have 6 months, which means within 3 months of your expiry date, they will give you a reply. Now you can only apply a month before.
Right.
So now and then
everything is just made a little bit harder each time.
Harder and harder. Do you know what that is? They think you don't see it. It's adding 3 months every 2.5 years. So instead of you using 10 years here, you end up using like 12 years or something before you can actually get the whole thing. It's all systemic. And you're just laughing like, I can see what you do.
How do you find, and when you're dealing with the Home Office and the Border and all of that sort of stuff, what is it like? What is their attitude towards you? What is their kind of disposition towards you, the sort of language they use, all of that sort of thing? How easy is it to navigate that system, or hard?
It's very, no, you can't do it. You dare not do it yourself, Louis. You need a lawyer. You need a solicitor.
Wow.
You try and do it yourself, you made a mistake, it's gone. Do you know that visa fees are not refundable? If you apply, this money don't come back to you. So you have to give yourself the best chance possible.
And you're working, Louis? You're working? You've got a job?
I'm at work right now. I've been working since the day I got my visa for my daughter in 2016.
So you're working, you're paying taxes, but do you feel...
I have a business as well,
Yeah.
Louis. I'm a DJ and a children entertainer.
So do you feel... Did you feel welcome in this country, the way that you're treated?
Not by the people, yes, but the system, no.
Yeah.
You know, because I've got friends from all walks of life. My wife's British, and she always goes, every time we need to reapply. She was born in Charlton, up the road from here. She just got...
So when you hear... So when you hear a politician...
This is what you're going through.
So when you hear a politician like Kemi Badenoch sort of suggesting that the current system is too lenient, what would you say?
You know, the funny thing about Kemi is like the same thing. She's just the instrument. You can tell, because there's no way you are a child of an immigrant and you behave like Kemi. No way, absolutely no way, because the life is already at, system is already at. So I don't even want to entertain Kemi. My focus is on Starmer. Like, we voted for you. I want you to talk about Brexit. I want you to talk about immigration. I want you to have a debate, because every time I've spoken to a Reform voter or anybody else, and I hit them in their good statistics like James O'Brien tells us to do, they've got no answer.
Okay.
They don't even know you pay for visas. They think you get everything for free. I've got no recourse to public funds on all my applications. I'm entitled to nothing.
Yes, and it is important to make that clear, because often we talk about benefits for migrants and so on. Many people who come here do not have something that's called no recourse to public funds, so you're not entitled to benefits and those sort of things.
Waiting, I want to quit my job. I can't, because my my status is still in. I applied in October, Louis. This job, I cannot quit, because if I quit my job, I need the BRP to apply for another job. So I'm stuck.
Sounds like you feel like you end up living with the Home Office in a way, Maurice.
Yeah, that is it. They dictate your life. They dictate every single thing you do. My mental health is gone crazy. I'm having to talk to myself every day that don't go crazy, don't go crazy. One day it's going to come around. Don't go crazy, don't go crazy. It's going to come around. Louis, I've done 15 years in September. I've had it with England. I want to move my British wife and my British kids back to Nigeria, because I'm sure I can give them a better life than what they have in UK here. And if Kemi thinks Nigeria is a hellhole, or pardon my language, if that's what she's saying, I'll tell her the richest people are still in Nigeria and people are still leaving. Don't think your rhetoric works on everybody. It can only work on people that have not traveled, that have not seen life. Go Google that to December and you'll know what Nigeria is all about. Thank you so much, Louis. Thank you for listening to me.
Not at all.
My blood is boiling and I don't want to, explode on the radio.
I
but
understand.
Thank you for what you do. Massive fun as well.
Maurice, really grateful to you, and you speak with real passion and a real insight into the realities of it's not all easy. You've got all this rhetoric all the time about being a soft touch. Doesn't mean that we need to open the doors for absolutely everybody, but sometimes it feels like the conversation is so askance from the realities of the bureaucracy of the system as it is. Alan is in Clevedon. Alan, morning.
Hi there.
Morning. You have experience of this yourself, although not yourself. Is it by your wife is Italian? Is that right?
That's right. Yes. She's been here since 1987.
Right. 2 years before I was born, so a fair old whack.
You're making me feel very old. Anyway, so she's spent her entire adult working life working in the UK with a national insurance number from day one, paying her taxes, national insurance, council tax, you name it. And when we got together in 2004, applying for British citizenship was the last thing in our minds. I mean, she came to the UK to escape Italian bureaucracy.
Yes.
And ingrained misogynistic tendencies and backhanders and stuff like that. And as your previous caller said, welcomed with open arms by the people.
Yeah.
And even the government, even the state. And then we never even anticipated her getting UK citizenship. Indeed, and we were thinking more of my getting Italian citizenship.
Yes.
Which at the time was incredibly easy, because all you needed to qualify was to be married to somebody for 3 years, or 18 months if you had children.
Yes. Yes.
So they've now, in a sort of tit-for-tat measure, increased the requirement to have Italian B1 language exam.
So she's obviously gone through that process now, and how she found it?
Well, that's the thing. So we hadn't anticipated doing it until the referendum.
Yes.
And so once that happened and the vote happened, and abuse started as well, it's just the most torturous process. I mean, it took us, I would say, from, 2017 and she got her citizenship in early 2020. Well, no, sorry, late 2019.
Yes.
And it was torturous, absolutely torturous. I can't believe that they think it's an easy touch. It's just...
Why was it torturous? Just explain for people, what was it about it that was so difficult?
The background information checks and such like that. So she's been self-employed for the last 20 years, always done her taxes and religiously paid her taxes and everything like that. But they wanted all your movements for like last 5 years outside the UK, any time spent over a certain amount of time outside the UK. So we had to apply for subject access requests, which came back with 0, despite the fact that she'd been frequently in and out of the country using a biometric passport. Then we had to go through all manner of solicitors and having to get things signed and authenticated and money. And I think it cost us about $4,000 in total.
Wow.
And that's just for a piece of paper that says you're a British citizen.
And a process that in some ways should be reasonably straightforward, because, of course, as a European citizen, EU citizen, there was a particular scheme about giving them indefinite leave to remain and so on. So on paper should have been more straightforward, and yet it wasn't.
Well, that's the thing. She was awarded ILR when she first arrived.
Right, yeah.
But that seemed to be invalid now after the referendum. And, I mean, it's a huge amount of money as well. It's absolutely skewed towards people who earn a decent wage.
Does she feel that it was worth it? Or you feel it was worth it?
When we first got together, she used to say, I want a British passport. And I always used to say, why?
Well,
because I don't find it valuable at all.
Oh, right.
I really don't. There's an instant assumption about you whenever you go through passport control. The best time of my life was when I had an EU passport. The only thing that it's provided any advantage with is that she can apply for jobs in the UK far more easily, have contracts in the UK.
She can vote
far more easily. And she can vote in the general election, yes, sure. But, I mean, that's the other thing that your previous caller touched on, is this sense of betrayal. Because, when there was Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party, there were all the Lexters as well, which just seemed totally counterintuitive. And they refused to discuss any of the impacts that they were having on people that wanted to vote Labour.
Yeah. Alan, grateful to you. I'm grateful for that experience, and I think it is. Look, again, it really illustrated we've heard from both of those calls. This thing is not easy. This assumption that somehow sort of navigating this process in Britain is a soft touch with regards to citizenship and residency and so on is easy. It really isn't. What your experience is of gaining citizenship, what it is like, the process, and whether you find yourself feeling that it's worth it and that you're having to consistently justify your existence in the country, even if you're working. 0345 6060 973, 0345 6060 973. More of your calls on the way. Of course, I'm also going to be joined by Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister of Israel, to get his thoughts on the Trump Gaza, quote-unquote, peace plan. First, at 11:30, coming up to 11:31, let's get the very latest LBC News headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 11:34. Of course, the world was rocked yesterday by President Trump's Gaza peace plan, quote-unquote, where he suggested that the population of Gaza would be replaced or removed from the Gaza Strip. Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio overnight has clarified this proposal, saying that this would be temporary in terms of a removal of the Palestinians living there, an idea that has, of course, drawn criticism from the United Nations, human rights groups, and Arab leaders as well. On a trip to Guatemala, Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, has said Trump's proposal was not hostile, but a generous move, showing the willingness of the United States to become responsible for the reconstruction of that area. Again, a proposal which shocked the world. Well, let's talk now to Ehud Olmert, who's Prime Minister of Israel, of course, from 2006 to 2009. Mr. Olmert, thank you so much for joining us this morning on LBC. Is this proposal being taken seriously in Israel, and are you taking it seriously?
No, it will be somewhat difficult for me to try and represent the opinion of Israelis. I can say that, not surprisingly, I don't take it seriously. And I'm not certain that anyone that was involved in raising this idea on the first place takes it seriously. And I also, in this context, think about President Trump himself. I think President Trump at the beginning, I heard someone saying maybe, why not just move these Palestinians? And as it happens to him, he fell in love with this idea. And he started to talk about it. And the more he talked about it, the more he fell in love with it. Although there was not any background preparation, any serious analysis, any serious thinking about what does it mean and what may be the possible ramification, not of doing it, it will never be done, of course, but of talking about it and of raising it and so on. So I don't take it seriously. It's a statement. Let's put it this way. When America has annexed Canada and has annexed Panama and has concluded the integration of Mexico, and Greenland will be part of America, come back to me and ask me how realistic the taking over of Gaza is.
Do you think that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was expecting this, and do you think that it is something that, on any level, that he would want?
I will not be surprised, I have to say, if this idea originally was not somehow suggested to the president from someone from the Netanyahu side. But obviously, it is not outrageously detached from what may have happened.
Do you think that this proposal, even if we're not to take it seriously in terms of the credibility of the idea that it might actually happen, nonetheless, do you think that it has impacted Israeli politics, certainly in terms of Netanyahu's far-right coalition partners, and also, of course, the safety of the remaining hostages currently being held in Gaza?
It may, precisely on this issue. If the next step in this direction will be some freezing of the effort to reach a comprehensive agreement about the ceasefire, the end of the war, and the return of all the hostages, then it may have a serious impact inside the state of Israel. And because no one will forgive Netanyahu or Trump if the outcome of this will be the loss of the remaining hostages in the hands of Hezbollah, of Hamas.
But presumably the far-right elements who have long advocated precisely the sort of thing that Trump was talking about yesterday, which is the removal of many or much of the Palestinians who are currently in Gaza and putting them somewhere else. Surely they'll be emboldened by this. Surely they'll think this is all of their Hanukkahs come at once. They'll be thrilled that they'll have a situation where they've got a president who is endorsing an idea that up to now they've barely dared express or hope for.
Well, I kept saying for a long time now that for the Messianic groups, the partners of Netanyahu in the government, the Ben-Gvirs and the Smotriches and those behind them, for them, the war in Gaza is a preliminary step in annexing Gaza and then subsequently annexing the West Bank and deporting the residents on the West Bank somewhere. So from that point of view, this is a very encouraging idea. Of course, I bet that when they think about Gaza, they don't think about Trump Towers and Trump hotels, and not about the Riviera, and not about the spa and the swimming pools that President Trump seemed to have talked about. They think about settlements that they want to build, and on the way to build more settlements in the West Bank, and who knows, maybe also building settlements in the south of Lebanon and in parts of Syria. But this is, of course, not something that most Israelis share with them, and I hope that other than just rhetoric and statements and slogans and some celebrations, that nothing more dangerous will come out of this.
How long do you think that Netanyahu is going to be able to cling on as Prime Minister?
I hope not very much. I hope that as soon as possible, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, anytime soon, it will be good for the state of Israel. This is the first time, I have to say, that the Prime Minister of the state of Israel has declared war on the state of Israel and on the people of Israel. It is about time that the people of Israel will get rid of him, and I hope soon.
Just explain what you mean by that. The first time he's declared war on the people of Israel. Explain what you mean.
He declared war. Everything that he does in the last few years is seriously damaging the status of Israel, the balance in the state of Israel, the unity of the people of Israel, the security of the state of Israel, and whatnot. So I think that this is a declaration of war, not a physical war, but a declaration of war against the basic fundamental values which have characterized the state of Israel from its proclamation, 76 years. And it's time that the people of Israel will show him the way out.
Do you think that Trump has any conception of the history or politics of Israel, Gaza, and the Middle East? Do you think he has any conception of it whatsoever?
You must ask him.
Well, what do you think?
I'll tell you something. I must say that I don't think that he knows much. I don't think that he ever cared to study that much. I'm absolutely stunned and overwhelmed by the energies that President Trump has in being able to raise every single day, and sometimes few times a day, new ideas that can shatter the world and that can devastate many parts of the world in ways which were unknown to all of us. And I think that this is part of it. I don't think that he had time to really think seriously about all the possible ramifications of pulling out people from Gaza into Jordan, into Egypt, into Albania, into, Indonesia. I mean, this has never been studied in any serious way. It's just, a statement. However, some of these statements may cause serious consequences to the people and the parties and the governments and the states involved. I think that already his assistants are trying to be very careful in reducing the expectations. What you quoted from Secretary Rubio and the other unknown sources in the White House, they are talking about deportation that will be with an agreement, that it will be a temporary, that they will be able to come back. I mean, all this is not serious.
Do you think that Palestinians in Gaza ultimately will end up moving, or significant numbers may end up moving en masse to other territories? Israel's defense minister is.
I don't think that they will volunteer to move. If they will be forced, it remains to be seen. When the American soldiers, after annexing Canada and Greenland and Mexico and Panama, will come in great numbers to Gaza to fight against the Gazans. I don't know. I don't think that Egypt will cooperate with this. I don't think that Jordan will cooperate with it. It must be terrible for them even to have to cope with the present consequences of the statements, let alone if something of this nature will ever happen. So I think really, it's entirely unnecessary, was unnecessary, except for maybe short-lived political gains for Netanyahu. And again, the perception of the outstanding leadership and creativity of President Trump.
And just finally, Mr. Olmert, do you still think that a two-state solution, which is still talked about so much by European states and others, do you think it is possible and credible idea still?
It's still talked about me. I raised this idea again together with the former foreign minister of the Palestinian Authority and the former ambassador to the United Nations, Dr. Nasser al-Qudwa, the nephew of Arafat. We raised it together. We issued a joint statement about two states. And we simply think that there is no alternative political solution. There can be alternative ways of dealing with the Middle East, some of which were just introduced by President Trump. But peace, comprehensive peace, a chance for resolving the outstanding issues once and for all, there is only one way, and this is a two-state solution. And therefore, I think that this is unavoidable. I am ready to fight in order to promote it and to cooperate with all European countries, which I am doing in the last few months together with Dr. Al-Qudwa from the Palestinian side.
Ehud Olmert there, who's Prime Minister of Israel from 2006 to 2009, giving us his assessment of what President Trump had to say and what his representatives, his emissaries, including, not least, of course, Marco Rubio, his Secretary of State, have had to say about what he said over the past 24 hours. You're listening to Lewis Goodall here on LBC. The time is 11:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 11:48, coming up to 11:49. Now, there isn't much which unites the Liberal Democrats and the Reform Party. But we have found something. Well, not just we. They have united on something, which is they are both incensed, angry, furious. In fact, Reform Party, you'll be amazed to hear, in a typically understated press release, has suggested that the UK is basically doing what dictators do. Keir Starmer being compared to, of all people, Robert Mugabe, in a comparison that no one thought would be coming in 2025. But indeed they have. And Natasha Clark, our political editor, is here to explain what is going on? Natasha.
Lewis, I think you're the only one that's getting excited about this local election story, apart from, of course, the Lib Dems and the Reform Party in an unlikely political alliance. So the news is today that local elections in 9 separate areas are being scrapped. Areas like Essex, Thurrock, Hampshire and Norfolk will see those elections delayed.
Tears being heard in Hampshire and Norfolk and across the county council.
What? What on earth is going on?
What are we going to do in early May?
What are those? What sort of 20 to 30% of people that vote in those local elections going to do now?
To this.
I know,
this is brilliant.
It is like Christmas for us political journalists, but sadly it is not to be. So that's thanks to a shake-up that Angela Rayner, the Housing Secretary, wants to make to local authorities. So they are abolishing this 2-tier system, which actually I think I personally agree with. The idea of county and district councils is quite confusing as a structure. They both just tend to blame each other and say, well, this is the other council's responsibility. I don't think a lot of people actually really know what on earth they do or how on earth they, do things like collect our bins and collect lots of council tax, but I think a lot of people don't quite understand how they work. So they're going to merge them all, create what's called unitary authorities instead. I know, yeah, exactly. Very exciting. Now, look, the majority of these local council elections are going to go ahead. The government say, essentially, if we decided to not scrap some of these local elections, it's going to be, electing a whole load of councillors. They're just going to then ditch them next year and then have to have a whole load of other elections. They say that could cost the taxpayer millions of pounds. But the Lib Dems are upset. The Reform Party are pretty furious about this too. And that is because they think that they've got the potential to make loads of gains in some of these areas. And council tax, of course, we heard the news the other day that council tax going up by around 5% on average. But some certain areas, including some of these areas, are going to see above inflation council tax hikes. And they think, the Reform Party, the Lib Dems think that they could take this on. And Nigel Farage, in particular, is very, very angry about this.
The two parties have colluded so that people can keep paid jobs for another couple of years. It's wrong at every level. There is absolutely no justification for cancelling the elections of 5.5 million people other than the cowardice of the existing political class. And that's why we've launched our petition on this, which nearly 250,000 people have signed already. We are blooming angry. This is wrong. The political weather has changed in local government over the course of the last 4 years, and people deserve to have a say.
He's blooming angry.
Nigel
Farage is blooming angry. Does anyone give a blink about any of it, apart from them?
Maybe, I think we do.
I do, of course.
Local Democrats, of course, really, really care. The Liberal Democrats really care. The Reform Party really care. But I think that is, again, for their own self-interest. They think there's a potential that they could win hundreds of these councils.
Farage does make a sort of interesting allusion there where he talks about the two main parties. It's interesting, the Conservative Party not creating a massive fuss about it.
No, it's not really one that Kemi Badenoch is quite going in all every Prime Minister's questions.
She doesn't feel at her electoral peak yet.
I wonder why that might be. It's because the seats that the Tories are defending are the ones that they won, I think, in 2021. A height of Boris bounce, vaccine bounce, Hartlepool by-election. They did incredibly well, and they know that they are going to lose seats at this. So I don't think it's one that Kemi Badenoch is going to quite be leaning into at all.
Sadness around the English County Council. Sorry to bring you this sad news, I know, everybody, but we'll get through it somehow. Meanwhile, the Home Secretary has been doing the morning round this morning. Well, not really, just in here, I think.
She has called the Cabinet exclusively with Nick Ferrari this morning. The Home Secretary has been talking about a range of issues. Now, I think the most interesting thing that I found from her interview, talking about schools and the fact that she thinks and she backs the use of knife arches to stop kids from carrying knives into the classroom. And like I said, she was speaking to LBC's Nick Ferrari earlier this morning. She said that if schools did need to take such measures, then she would back them.
We do want much stronger action to tackle knife crime and youth crime more widely. So we've set a mission that should be about halving knife crime over the next 10 years. Already schools can use those sorts of metal arches and things. And I would support schools that want to do that because schools need to be kept safe.
And the other political big story around today, Lewis, is of course Grenfell Tower and what's going to happen to that. An incredibly difficult decision for any Secretary of State, any Prime Minister to make the decision. But this has been rumbling on for a very long time now. And I remember speaking to ministers about this at the time in the previous Tory government about what they were going to do about Grenfell Tower. And basically most of the experts say that it's unsafe, that it should not be allowed to stay up forever, that it will be at some point structurally unsafe to keep it up. The survivors, of course, have reacted quite angrily with the news today that the government are going to say that it should be taken down according to those reports. Survivors say that they have not been consulted enough, but Yvette Cooper says that Angela Rayner has been in talks with some of those survivors.
Angela Rayner has been meeting with Grenfell survivors and families for a very long time. I know that she is continuing to do so. I think that's her priority, having further discussions with them today.
So it was consulted, all people were consulted?
I know that it's been something that's a huge personal priority for her because this is just so devastating, everything that's happened there.
And also, Lewis, I've got a story today about what the Home Secretary wants to do about mobile phone theft. She wants to give police more powers so they can crack down on this. And I've been told that she wants to get them to speed up the signing of search warrants. You know how, essentially, I'm sure you and I know people that have had their phones nicked. They turn on their Find My Phone. They trace it back to an address. They pass this information on to the police and they say, really sorry, we can't do anything about it. We need to get a search warrant to go into this property. I'm told that it just doesn't happen quickly enough with many police forces around the country. And the Home Secretary wants to be able to do more. She told us that is in fact on the cards.
Yeah, we know there's been a big increase in mobile phone theft over the last few years, over 40% increase in snatch theft. And this has been driven often by organised crime. Some of those phones are ending up being sent far and wide right across the world. We need much stronger action. You've seen some of the work that the Met has been doing with that hotspot targeted going after the criminals responsible. And also we've had some further action by some of the tech companies bringing in safety features and so on. But we need them both to go much further. We need policing and tech companies working hand in hand so we get stronger action to design out the risks that phones will be sent and sold on, and also that targeted hotspot policing to go after organised crime.
And she's hosting tech bosses, the National Crime Agency and police today for a summit at the Home Office on what more can be done to tackle mobile phone theft. They say that's up 43% in the last year. Very newsy.
And of course, Natasha, the thing that's actually over the course of this year could make the biggest impact to the government's political fortunes is about to be announced by the Bank of England, because if kids are expecting the potential first interest rate cut for some time, could be the first of 2 or 3 or even 4, which will have a big effect on the government's political fortunes.
Exactly. And, for Rachel Reeves, as she's looking at her, OBR spring statement, all of the government forecasts that we know are coming in, there was a report earlier this week in the newspapers that her headroom has been completely wiped out. And we know that the cost of government borrowing is absolutely eye-watering. The government spend billions of pounds every month just on servicing our debts. And that is something that would be eased if the Bank of England decide to cut this. And of course, for mortgage holders as well, that will be much, much relief if they do indeed go ahead with several cuts to the Bank of England's base interest rate.
Indeed, and we're expecting that decision from the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee within the next couple of minutes, which of course we'll bring to you live on LBC. Natasha Clark there, our political editor. I want to get Darius in from Hemel Hempstead, who I think has something to say about this Badenoch proposal before we go to the news and that decision. Darius, morning.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Well, thank you. Yeah. What? You had something to say about Badenoch, I think.
About what, sorry?
About Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, because I was driving to work and I heard her comments about not enough hospital or schools or GP appointments because of immigration. And it's just that triggered me to call because my point of view is if you invite people to the country, say hospital is prepared for 50,000 people, and then you invite 20,000 people, most of them of which going to be working, the taxes should be spent into also GPs, schools, and hospitals.
Of course.
It seems like is these people is good for them to pay taxes, but to spend anything on them, it seems like there is still the same amount of spaces for people. These things are not getting increased.
Okay, Darius, I'm grateful to that. I just want to very quickly, James, I've only got about 30 seconds, 45 seconds or so. James in Basingstoke, what do you want to say on this?
Thank you so much. I'm Lewis. Unfortunately, I have 30 seconds, but I really wish I had more than that. I'm looking at the House of Commons library website. I don't know if Kemi has ever heard of something called No Recourse to Public Fund, NFPR. Mm-hmm. But if for any reason Kemi has heard of it, looking at the website, you clearly see somewhere that it says no recourse to public funds has been a standard visa condition since 1980, right? Even during the COVID pandemic, the government did not waive normal benefit rules during the crisis. So I honestly do not understand. At the moment, the rules currently are that immigrants on skilled worker visas, including those working in the NHS, do not have recourse to public funds. My 3-year-old daughter cannot go to nursery and have 30 hours of free nursery.
Yes.
I will have to pay for it.
Yes.
That is after I have paid £1,035 per year in immigration health surcharge, which is supposed to fund the NHS.
Yes.
£1,035 per person per year.
Yes.
I am looking at my taxes from the 2020-2023. I have paid $18,135 in tax and $6,100 in national insurance payment.
Yeah.
And then, in fact, the HMRC website even says that $4,816 of what I paid was allocated to health. And I had already paid in immigration health surcharge to cover my health.
James, you got a bit more than 30 seconds in the end there. I'm grateful, I'm glad we did, because it made the really, really important point for people who come here. No recourse to public funds. You can't just get benefits. You can't just get NHS. All that soft touch stuff is much overhyped. We're going to move on now. We're going to bring you that interest rate decision live on LBC as well. Going to be very important for many, many householders across the country. But first, we're going to talk about a run of record-breaking global temperatures continuing, even with the La Nina weather pattern cooling around the globe. It looks like we're at 1.75 degrees with the hottest January on record. When we look at what is going on with America and Trump and China and ever-rising global temperatures, do you have any hope whatsoever that we're going to be able to address climate change?
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 12:04. You're listening to Lewis Goodall here on LBC, sitting in for James O'Brien all of this week. And just to repeat that breaking news from the Bank of England, from the old lady of Threadneedle Street herself. It's just a nickname. I know I sound mad, but it is actually what the Bank of England's called. Interest rates have been cut to 4.5%. That is from 4.75%. Today's decision from the Monetary Policy Committee means that rates are now at their lowest level since June 2023. And the MPC voted in favour of that cut from 7 to 2. And of course, that means that borrowing rates will be cheaper, tended to boost consumer spending. Mortgages should feed through to the mortgage markets to some extent. But of course, if you're a saver, it will affect that negatively in the other direction. So swings roundabouts. But the government doubtless will have a little bit of cheer, because over the longer term, that is what is probably going to make most difference to their political fortunes. Anyway, we'll have more analysis on that in the course of the next hour. But first, we want to talk a little bit about a story which eclipses even the mortgage markets in importance, and that is, of course, the question around climate change. Because climate was one of those things that obviously I'll be really, really honest with you, really straightforward about what it's like as a journalist covering climate change. As a journalist, it is one of the hardest stories to cover. You sometimes talk to people and say, why don't you talk about climate change? Well, why don't you talk about ever-warming temperatures? It's the biggest story of our time. And of course it is. It's the one that will affect everyone, will have the biggest long-term impacts, not just on us, but on our children and generations unborn. So absolutely, it's massive. But there is a problem with it. And the problem from a news point of view, from a journalistic point of view, there's kind of two problems with it. What's one of the problems with reporting on a melting glacier? It's that it melts very, very slowly. It is, by definition, glacial. And glacial stories do not necessarily make for the most exciting stories. And there is a kind of weird mismatch and asymmetry. And I know some of you will get frustrated hearing this, but I'm just telling you how it is. There is a weird kind of mismatch and asymmetry between the level of importance of the story, which is high, which in many ways could not be higher, and the kind of day-to-day drama of the story, which is incremental and slow. And on top of that, even when there are freak weather occurrences, we've seen the Los Angeles fires, of course, we've seen endless wildfires in Europe, we've seen freak cold, all of this different sort of things. Of course, you can never say for absolutely certain, you can never point to that. That's the dramatic bit. But you can't point to it and say with absolute certainty that it wouldn't have occurred without climate change. You can say that these events become far more likely, but you have to add that qualifier in. And so it can be difficult as a journalist to cover. And it can also, the other second reason, and this is kind of the bit that I kind of want to talk to you about, is that it's a story that can fill people for entirely understandable reasons with absolutely profound existential dread. Right? Like other stories, even if they're sad or dramatic, there's still a sense of kind of human agency and control. And of course, we do have human agency over climate change because it's man-made and therefore it could be arrested and stopped by man. But often it feels like it can't, because it is beyond the control even of the world's most powerful nation states if they were to act unilaterally, and the biggest emitters. And there is, of course, news today, and this is from the Copernicus Climate Change Service, that last month, January, was the warmest January on record, with surface-to-air temperatures 1.75 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Now, of course, we've been told for many years by others, including the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, that we're really aiming for 1.5. So we're already, last January, 0.25 degrees over where we should be, or not even where we should be, but where the kind of cutoff for the worst effects of climate change might be. And this has baffled climate scientists to some extent, because actually they were expecting and indeed hoping this January to be cooler, because they didn't have the El Nino weather event, which takes place in the tropics and which warms the planet artificially and which has reached its peak last January. So we're expecting it to be a bit cooler. But Samantha Burgess, the strategic lead for climate, the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts, Christmas party, must be a hell of a laugh, said January 2025 is another surprising month, continuing the record temperatures observed throughout the last 2 years. Copernicus will continue to monitor ocean temperatures and their influence on our evolving climate throughout 2025. January marks the 18th month of the past 19. Take this, Reform. January marked the 18th month of the past 19 to record global average surface temperatures above the 1.5 pre-industrial level. Now, remember, of course, that under the Paris Climate Agreement, world leaders said that, signed in 2015, world leaders said they would try to prevent global temperatures rising by more than 1.5 degrees. But unfortunately, we're clearly not getting there. Julian Nicholas, climate scientist at Copernicus, says this is what makes it all a surprise. We're not seeing the cooling effect what we would expect. Instead, we're seeing a global temperature rising and rising. that goes alongside, and I don't want to be again the bearer of bad news. And you can already see why sometimes we sort of avert our eyes from this stuff, because it feels so existential and it feels so angst-ridden. And every sentence you read, I can imagine, it makes you just think, I'm going to turn off the radio because it's too much for me to deal with. It seems too existential, but we can't avert our eyes, can we? Copernicus said that the Arctic sea ice in January hit a record monthly low. An analysis from the US this week said it was the second lowest in their data set. Overall, 2025 isn't expected to follow 2023 and 2024 as the hottest yet, but many do expect it to be the third hottest yet. And so I suppose the question I want to get at is, where does this leave us? Where does this leave us? Because it feels, doesn't it, if we're taking the thing that I know most about, which is politics, leaving aside the climatology, of which I can only go on the experts, it feels a particular moment of doom, doesn't it, with regards to the path, the effort to try and keep it under 1.5 degrees. Because if we look at the politics around the world, well, what have we got? We've got amazing scientific advances being achieved, that's for sure. And that's the thing that probably gives me hope. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But if we're taking the politics, I think, has never felt further away from the consensus on climate change that pretty much held, I would say, certainly right up until the sort of closing years, even more recently than that, of the last decade, where pretty much from, I mean, people forget now, it was Margaret Thatcher, as a Conservative Prime Minister who in 1989, was it 1988, 1989, addressed the United Nations, warning about, as a scientist herself, being aware of what was involved, and obviously the science of climate change still in its infancy by comparison today, warning about the potential effects of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, warning about the potential effects of global warming, of too much carbon being in the atmosphere. And that carbon, of course, continues to rise with every passing year. But of course, in the last few years, it has become far more politicised, especially in the United States, but also in the UK as well, far more a point of division between different parties. And of course, we've got a global situation at the moment where the US has pulled out again under Trump of the Paris Climate Accords. Trump is embracing a fossil fuel energy policy first, talking about drill baby drill, of course, opening up even more swathes of America to be extracted for oil and gas. Biden, to be fair as well, extracted more hydrocarbons under the Biden administration than of any presidency before. China still investing huge amounts in renewables, of course, but still emitting huge amounts of carbon and continuing to build dirty coal-fired power stations. And of course, you've got much of the rest of the world as well, the developing world, entirely legitimately and rightly, saying, well, you have managed in the West to create a wealthy societies off the back of the extraction of hydrocarbons, off the back of fossil fuels. Why shouldn't we? What's the alternative? So where does that leave us? Where does that leave Britain? And where does it leave the fight against climate change? And I have to say, in that context, I mean, I've interviewed people in Port Talbot in the steelworks, which has been closed. It's going to be reopened as an electric arc furnace, but the old steelworks will be gone and it will employ far fewer people. Same thing's been happening in Scunthorpe and elsewhere. It is a difficult challenge when people in those industries turn around and say, well, why on earth should we lose our jobs? In partly, not exclusively, but partly as a result of trying to stop climate change in a world like that. Why should one British manufacturing worker lose their job in a situation where pollution around the world, where carbon emitting around the world is going up and up and up, and in a political environment which doesn't seem to care? And it is a hard thing to answer. And it probably means there isn't a very good answer. And I wonder whether you think, and increasingly, one sort of feels like you have to think, whether we might need to rethink the way Britain engages with climate change, in the sense that we can talk about targets and we can talk about the importance of targets, fine. But maybe the advantage, maybe the thing we have to do in Britain is think about the technological expertise we can play, investing in the technology we can play to deal with some of these effects after they take place, because we're going to need to help the developing world deal with this stuff. And we are such a small emitter of carbon ourselves that even if we stopped emitting all carbon tomorrow, it would make no difference. So where can we make the biggest difference? Is there a difference we can still make? Looking across the world, do you have any faith now that we will be able to collectively overcome the climate change that we're facing as an existential threat? And do you have any faith left in the leadership of the big countries on earth in particular, to deal with this? Or do you think that everybody has already given up? And how do you feel about it psychologically when you hear these stories? Because I know it makes me feel just, it quickens the pulse, right? It makes you really worried. But I think that's part of the problem. It can lead to this sense of kind of just existential angst. And that's a problem. It's a problem in how we report it, how we talk about it. Do you feel responsible for it in any sense? And is that unfair? Because our individual contributions are so microscopic as to be barely worth talking about. How existential, how angst-ridden do you feel about this? And what do you think you can do about it? Do we think that actually 1.5 degrees is gone? 0345 60 60 973 0345 60 60 973. Want to have a conversation which hopefully doesn't leave us too dispirited, particularly when you consider there's a report out this week detailing the eco-anxiety felt by the young in particular. And who can blame them? Who can blame them? Because it leaves you feeling so utterly powerless. You're listening to Lewis Goodall here on LBC. The time is 12:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 12:18. A few of your texts on this. Beatrice says, OMG! Always a good start to a WhatsApp. What a failure of journalistic imagination, Lewis. You can make climate change about everything. Personal stories, food security, what's happening globally, business opportunities, political failures, long-term thinking for our children, hopeful stories about people who are mitigating climate change. I think whilst you're one of the best journalists we have in the UK, Lewis, I'm very sorry to hear this climate crisis hard to report coming for you. Beatrice, I'm just being honest about how it's internalised in many newsrooms. And what you've just said there in a way demonstrates it, which is that you're talking about all of those things, food security, business opportunities, political failures, but then climate change will always be the second order thing, by which time very often you've lost people in terms of their attention. It's an attention deficit economy that we've got. So it is, because it is a slow process, it is hard to report. That's not saying you don't do it. I'm just saying that it is part of the reason why sometimes when it comes to, it will always be, put it this way, when is climate change going to come top of the news agenda? Because it's so slow, it will generally be a second, third, fourth story. If there's something that's happening immediately now, it's likely to displace it. And it feels familiar to the audience. So that's the problem that I'm trying to kind of get at. Jason says the economic system is cleverly structured to prevent any actions that would allow a serious attempt at tackling climate change. Within a few years, we'll see hundreds of thousands dying in days caught in wet events. Hundreds of millions dying will not change the path we're on. Shut down the entire world economy will become an imperative very soon. Nothing like a bit of existential angst, is there, Jason? Steve says, Lewis, glaciers move slowly, but high winds create high seas and they can bring down sea defences. In fact, years ago, someone who knew about the subject in the UK told me something that could speed things up dramatically. He told me that at the time, at least, the landowner was responsible for the upkeep of the sea defence bordering the sea. He also said that when attempts were made to contact landowners about the upkeep of the sea walls, they found a series of PO boxes in Ireland and Northern Ireland that were not replying. It seems some people bought land knowing they could leave the sea defences in a poor state so they could make a profit from it. Well, there you go. I didn't expect to be talking about that. And Nathaniel says, to be fair, most of China's pollution is the result of Western factories moving there. It's a fair point, Nathaniel. That is right. We often pat ourselves on the back in this country saying how much our carbon emissions have reduced since 1990 or 1980 or whatever it happens to be, whichever data point you start from. Part of the reason for that is simply that we've outsourced so much of our manufacturing to other countries. As I say, I want to talk to you about how responsible you personally feel for climate change and psychologically, what effect it has on you when you hear this stuff, and maybe on your children as well. IO 0345 60 60 973. IO is in Romford. IO.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Good, good.
What? So I'll just make my point very quickly.
No, not at all.
I believe in the science. Fully believe in the science. I'm a scientist, engineering background, believe in it all. I think man could stop it. But the problem is, I think it's too late. I think we actually have to change our approach because as human beings, this is what we're like, right? Until the last minute, until we actually see the effects, people don't really care. Look at all the elections around the world. Look at the Green Party. How many seats do they get? That we put in Trump now because everybody's prioritised other things other than the climate change. He's come in, he's pulled us out of this agreement, that agreement. If the UK stopped tomorrow, like you said, China's still making coal-fired power stations. I think we have to change our approach. And the truth of the matter is, I think in the end what will happen is we will have to surrender the land to the sea. We will have to surrender certain areas to, when it's ridiculously hot, turns to a desert or whatever. People just won't be able to live there. And I do not agree with Nigel Farage on anything, right?
Yeah.
But over the years, I think, actually, I do agree with him. Now we have to move to basically investing in what we can do to basically protect ourselves from the effects after we get to where we get. We're supposed to be at 1.5, or that's the aim. You can see now, 1.75. And really and truly, look what's going on around the world. It is just not a priority. People do not want to be inconvenienced. I bought an electric car, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the reason why I bought an electric car, if I'm 100% honest, it was nothing to do with the environment. It was because I just looked at the petrol prices. I looked at how much it costs to, run an electric car. And that's the reason why I made that switch. If it costs me money to do it, sorry, I just can't afford to do that. So individual people cannot do anything about it. You sit here, you look, what can I do? Split my rubbish up into plastic and whatever. What's that going to do, really and truly? We saw what happened in the LA fires. We saw what's happened, even in, Spain, with the mud and all of that sort of stuff. The people in those regions who have seen this, they may have changed their mind about climate change. They may have, thought, wow, this is crazy, because they've actually seen it. But if you're just, I live in Romford, I'm looking around, seems like a normal day to me. That's how people, that is how people live.
Exactly.
And it's not going to happen.
What do you think, Io, when you hear, things like, it's been the hottest January on record, and there's always sort of like things getting worse and worse and worse, and it feels like the sort of air in the balloon is just filling and filling and filling, and the balloon's going to burst at any time. What psychological effect does that have on you with regards to the issue? Does it make you feel worried, anxious? What does it do?
It doesn't really make me feel worried or anxious, but I'm not going to lie. Do you know what I think sometimes? I think, you know what? I'm in my early 40s now, yeah? If I get 30, 40 years out of life, I'll be 80, ain't going to be my problem.
Yeah.
And that's basically what people think about. Yes, your kids, I've got kids, it'll be their problem. It'll be something that they have to sort out. But the thing is, what can we actually do? If I go and vote for the Green Party at the next election, what's the point of that? It's not gonna make any difference whatsoever. Let's be honest about it. So the way I see it is, it's too late. It really is too late. And if it's gonna cost us a whole load of money, for example, like you said, if the UK did every single thing, it costs everyone a bit of money, inconvenience, right, we're now net zero, we can announce it, net zero, and then China go and build 40.
You know what I think? I think that it was going to have to, and this is a sort of grim thing to say, and some people might not like me saying it, but I think it is the truth. I think it's going to end up having to get worse before it gets better. In the sense that a good example, I think, is a counterexample or parallel is the pandemic. Now, for years and years and years before the pandemic, you had virologists and other scientists saying, another pandemic is coming. We've got to prepare for a pandemic. We've got to prepare for it. And governments go, yeah. Well, okay, we'll do a bit of preparation, but, we're not going to do too much. We're not going to worry about it too much. It's not going to happen, is it? And then what happens? We get one. And then suddenly the whole of humanity, basically, our whole industrial production, our best scientists, everybody, work on this one virus which appears. And before you know it, 12 months later, miraculously, you've got a vaccine, and 2 to 3 years later, life is reasonably back to normal. I think the truth is that there is probably going to have to be something that is so catastrophic or so terrible that happens as a result of climate change for everybody to go, okay, now we really need to focus on it.
That is true, but do you know what I think the problem with that analogy is? Yeah, with the pandemic, you've got an instant thing. If we find a vaccine, then everything's solved.
You can point to something very direct, whereas with climate change, you can always say it's not.
And not even just that. Basically, we're going to get to a point where we can't reverse the effects. So,
possibly.
You get to that point where you cannot reverse the effects, then it doesn't really matter how many people get together and, do this, because it's too late. The land's already gone. The seas are already gone. The species are already extinct. The ecosystem's already messed up. So it's just one of these things. I think human nature, if we look in history, we just do not do it. In London, I'll tell you what, people would get really, really anxious about climate change. I'll tell you when the water is halfway up Big Ben, then everyone will pay attention. Until then, no one's going to care. I'm sorry.
I'm grateful to Ira in Romford there, who I think probably sums up where a lot of people are on this. Nick is in Launceston. Nick.
Hello.
Morning. Afternoon, I should say. Afternoon.
Yes, afternoon. I can only echo the same sentiments as the last caller. My opinion is we are facing the stark reality of it could well be too late.
I mean, we should say, by the way, just so people don't feel too gloomy, we're at 1.75. We're at 1.75 now.
Yeah.
Scientists say that, that is partly because of El Nino and so on. So the sort of base mean is still about 1.2, 1.3. So we're still, we should on average be lower than we are. But obviously, this last month's figures or the last sort of couple of years hardly help much.
But you can't argue with the statistics.
No, the trend is very clear. The trend is very clear.
Very clear. If you look at the graphs for the last 10 years, you will see nothing other than a continual increase of the average global temperature.
Although there have been tremendous, in fairness, there have been, it's not all bad news, there have been tremendous scientific advances, engineering advances, wind power, which used to be tremendously expensive, no longer is. Electric cars are now becoming highly normalised. We are, and this is, I suppose in my more optimistic moments, Nick, and I do think, and maybe this is very naive of me, it particularly should be as a political journalist, but I do actually have a tremendous faith in humanity's ingenuity. And what I fear is, though, as I say, I expect it will get worse before it gets better, as I was saying to Io. But I do think our ability, actually, if we put our collective minds to it, is potentially unparalleled.
Therein lies there's the rub. That is the putting our collective minds to it. I'm an entomologist, so I study insects and I teach people about insects, and I'm also very, very, very aware of the current trends in the environment, and also the invertebrate population of the planet are the strongest barometer for the health of the planet. And, there's no denying it. There's been like a 40%, 50% reduction in biodiversity in the last sort of 50 years. And that is as a result of human impact. And it's only going to aggravate things further. If we continue the way we are, we are going to reach that knife edge where it's too late. We can do things as a whole, but as an individual, what can you do? You can do your recycling, yes. You can be plant-friendly and animal-friendly in your lifestyle, yes. You can convert to electric, yes.
Yeah, I think, Nick, I get annoyed with...
small things.
I agree. I honestly, I get annoyed, actually, in a way, with some of the kind of environmental discourse, which... Well, actually, I think let's actually distinguish two things. I think two things often get meshed together, which is climate change and environmentalism. I think there's more we can do in terms of protecting our environment as individuals, clearly, whether it's recycling or just looking after, not leaving rubbish everywhere, trying to do our best to look after the environment in which we live, in which we visit. That, we can have as individuals, some impact on that. Climate change is quite different. Actually, as individuals, the impact we can have is almost negligible. I mean, basically is negligible. That has to come from state action, from state political action, which can direct the collective efforts of society. It's not going to come from us.
I was saying, and I couldn't agree more, our appointed elected leaders need to start focusing and doubling down on this fact. Sea levels are going to rise. Now, if the North Pole ice melts, that's not really going to do much because that ice occupies more water than the volume would accommodate in water. It's the land-borne ice that is the problem. When the glaciers are melting, when Antarctica melts, that is when the sea levels are going to rapidly rise. And what's it going to take? Is it going to take paddling down London and London becoming the new Venice before people start to take notice? Sea levels have begun to rise. There are places that are disappearing into the sea.
Indeed so. Venice without the food.
You can't dispute it.
Venice without the food or the sunshine. What a glorious sight that would be. Something to look forward to. That's Nick in Launceston there. We're talking about climate change. Kind of what it does to our minds, really. Just sort of worry about it and about what it does to you and how you feel about it and whether... Actually, given what we're seeing in terms of the data and also what we're seeing in America, whether you feel that we in Britain, whether anyone's life in Britain is worth changing negatively in order to try and fight something that on our own we just have no hope of combating. 0345 6060 0345 6060 You're listening to Lewis Goodall here on LBC. The time is 12:31 and let's get the very latest news headlines with Amelia Cox.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:35. A few of your texts and WhatsApps on the question of climate change. Penny says, why bother reporting about the climate anymore? The fascists won. The media helped them. Let's just try and get by without causing the fascists to punish us all more before we all die. Must be a right laugh around your place at Christmas, Penny. Nikki from Italy says, fewer and fewer people care about climate change because the right-wing press just laugh at it and dismiss it. I think we've gone beyond this. I just see disaster. And, when I said that we don't always do climate change because it gets too depressing, I think we might have what the Romans might have called QED here. Jimmy Mack says, what difference can I make, said 8 billion people. It all starts at home. I took a conscious decision not to have kids. Oh, God, where would that get us? Eat meat once a week. We'll definitely get extinction then. Take one flight a year and don't own a car. However, I appear to be the only one of my peers who's made any effort to make any kind of change. Your fatalist argument is not helping. Please try to encourage people to make small changes. Well, not having kids. That's not a small change, Jimmy. It's a potentially existential one for the human race. And I do worry that sometimes this fatalistic feeling is precisely the thing that in the end means that nothing ever gets done. Anyway, want your thoughts about whether it is too late to stop climate change. 0345 6060973. Turning to other matters, though, news on the economy, much awaited by many people, including, of course, potentially mortgage holders as well. As we've been reporting this last hour, the Bank of England has decided to cut interest rates from 4.75 to 4.5%, the lowest base rate since June 2023. Let's get some analysis on this now from Danni Hewson, financial analyst at AJ Bell. Danny, thanks so much for joining us. An expected cut, but nonetheless will be a welcome one, certainly for people who are looking to borrow.
Hi, Lewis. Yeah, absolutely. It was expected. Markets pretty much overwhelmingly pricing in a cut today. And yes, for many mortgage holders, those on trackers and the standard variable rate, this is going to be a relief. So for those on a tracker mortgage, for every £100,000 worth of borrowing, they can expect to see a reduction in how much they pay per month by about £15. Can take about a month to come through, so just keep an eye on that. Conversely, of course, for savers, you will expect to see savings rates cut. So, it's always two sides of the coin. What was really interesting about this decision, though, because it was nailed on, but when you look at the vote, so there are 9 members of the Monetary Policy Committee who sit around the table and decide whether or not everything is looking okay to cut rates or whether or not they need to hold. Well, it was 7-2 in favour of a cut, but what was really interesting is that the 2 that didn't vote for the 0.25 percentage point cut, that's because they wanted a 0.5 percentage point cut, and that is because of concern about the way the economy is looking.
Yes, indeed. Just looking through the MPC report, the bank, rather gloomily, suggesting that the UK will only narrowly avoid a recession after it's downgraded its economic outlook, which is not going to be very welcome news for number 11 Rachel Reeves, is it?
No, it's certainly not going to be great news for Rachel Reeves, because growth has been what this government has been trying to create in order to make us all feel better. And absolutely, the bank is now expecting that rather than the 1.5% GDP growth that it expected, only back in November it expected that amount of growth for 2025, it sliced that by half. So only 0.75% growth
way below trend.
Way below trend. And also, it looks like the UK will only just miss out on recession, as you say, because the bank is now expecting for the last quarter of last year that we only had a minus 0.1%, and that for the first quarter of this year, we'll only get 0.1% growth. I mean, that is flatlining by anybody's estimation.
And of course, it would not take much on the basis of that, and maybe that is, who knows, the imposition of tariffs from Donald Trump, obviously put on hold for Canada and Mexico, but who knows what's going to happen, definitely imposed on China. Some other economic shock, as yet unforeseen, and before you know where you definitely are in recession.
It's exactly right. And the bank did point out the fact that it would be looking very closely at what happens to tariffs from the White House. We have seen a huge amount of market volatility over the last couple of weeks as markets try and figure out what on earth is going to happen. And those tariffs on Canada and Mexico might be on hold, but they've not gone away. And we know that Donald Trump's already turning his gaze towards Europe. There's been a lot of talk about where the UK may stand in all of this. And although most economists think that these tariffs will be inflationary primarily in the United States, lots of businesses like Mattel already saying that prices for things like their Barbies will have to go up in the States if these tariffs are imposed. Well, it could then, of course, create friction globally, and that potentially is inflationary. And what is noticeable was that the bank has been looking at where inflation is expected to go this year, and because of rising energy costs, we're at 2.5% now, but it thinks that by the third quarter of the year, by the autumn, energy prices mean we'll be back at 3.7%. So, this is textbook stagflation.
So
absolutely.
So, way above target.
Way above target. But it's got to balance this really difficult position that it's in, where you've got inflation ticking back up to 3.7%, but you've got growth turgid. And we know that because of the changes to national insurance, because of the increase in the national living wage, all those things coming in April, a lot of businesses are really struggling with costs, particularly in sectors like retail and hospitality. And when you have those sectors saying, we're not investing, we're not creating jobs, in fact, we're cutting jobs, then the bank has to be very careful about how it acts. It doesn't want to be too restrictive, because clearly then you just plunge the country into recession. So while on the one hand it's got to think carefully about inflation, on the other hand it doesn't want to put its foot on the brakes too far.
So let's get this straight, Danni, because you've used the word, and I think it's clearly the appropriate word in this circumstance, which is a stagflationary situation. We are in a pretty unusual situation where the Bank of England is forecasting actual quite significant increases to inflation. Indeed, inflation that will be above its 2% plus or minus 1 target, and yet is actually not only cutting rates, but a significant minority of the MPC actually wanted to cut rates even faster and further than they've decided today. This is not a happy position for the Bank of England to be in.
It's not a happy position, and markets are already pricing in significantly more rate cuts for the year than they were just a couple of months ago. So now looking at where we expect to be this time next year, a 1 percentage point reduction is what is expected. So that is a significant number of cuts for the rest of the year. The bank is really taking a look at exactly what is going on. And of course, we're seeing the reaction in markets today. The pound has fallen against the dollar. The FTSE 100 is going great guns because of the number of companies that earn their revenue in dollars. And of course, when that's then translated into pounds, it looks fantastic. Thank you very much. So it is a really tricky position that the bank is in. And yeah, it just sort of demonstrates the really precarious nature that we find ourselves in, because the absolute worst case scenario is for unemployment to be going up, inflation to be going up, but growth to be completely AWOL.
And just finally, Danni, this potentially, particularly the inflationary outlook, is really going to be problematic for Rachel Reeves, isn't it? Because if we end up in a situation where inflation is back at higher than 3%, and it's a political problem, but we'll leave that to one side, just in terms of the public finances and the changes in terms of departmental spending, if she wants them to keep up with inflation, and public sector pay as well, if she wants that to keep up with inflation, suddenly her fiscal headroom could be nowhere to be seen.
It's going to be a massive headache for the Chancellor, and there are already a lot of questions about how she is going to manage this. She has said that she won't increase taxes. She said that she won't change her fiscal rules. So the only really tack open to her is to cut back on the spending that she wants to deliver. The spending that she wants to deliver because she wants growth. So it is quite a difficult circle for her to square. And just in terms of all of us, if you think about inflation where it was, we were in a situation where businesses felt that they could give over inflationary pay increases, and in fact wanted to, because the labour market was so tight. If we're in a situation where the labour market isn't as tight, where unemployment is going up, then businesses are just going to say, we cannot afford those pay rises. So for all of us, looking at the pennies when we get our paycheck and whether or not there's more month at the end of the money than there was last month, it's going to be quite tricky.
Danni Hewson there, financial analyst at AJ Bell. I actually think, just looking through these figures and what the Bank of England's saying, it's a real body blow to Rachel Reeves, actually, and to the Chancellor and to the government, not only in terms of, and there's barely any good news. On the one hand, yes, a cut to the base rate, which will be welcome for borrowers and ease some financial pressures, potentially for some mortgage holders, for sure. But then on the other hand, looking at the growth forecast politically, this is a government which has put all of its eggs in the growth basket. Doesn't exist, the growth basket, but just bear with me here. Big political problem there. But also, as I was saying there, the inflationary numbers, inflation forecast, potentially well over 3%. Really, really difficult politically in terms of household finances, particularly that's being driven by energy bills and water bills and so on. But also in terms of, as I say, the impact on the public finances of the government potentially having to give bigger pay awards to public sector workers, also matching departmental spending with inflation, just keeping it up at inflation so there aren't real terms cut. When you consider how little fiscal headroom she had at the last budget, very, very difficult indeed. Going to be very difficult political terrain for the Chancellor and for the Prime Minister to navigate. We are sticking with the topic of climate change, though, over the course of the remainder of the show, and asking whether you think that it's too late to do anything about it. 0345 60 60 973. It's Lewis Goodall sitting in for James O'Brien here on LBC. The time is 12:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time is 12:49. Zoe messages to say, now you've gone on to talk about GDP growth without making the connection that it is the growth and use of energy materials that is driving all the destruction you were talking about in the earlier section on climate change. Zoe, yeah, well, maybe, but I think this is one of the most misguided bits when we're talking from the environmental movement or the net zero movement. I really do. Because honestly, I know you get this all the time, say growth is the problem. No. The question is about what type of growth. I genuinely, really, really believe that you will never, ever solve climate change if you look at it from the purpose or the point of view that basically it is going to immiserate people, that it's going to make people worse off, that their standard of living will never grow. And the reason I say that is because, frankly, the standard of living for so many people is not high enough now on the basis of the hydrocarbon economy, let alone if you're basically saying to them, well, we're all going to have to make all of these sacrifices this way or the other. I'm afraid humanity just doesn't work like that. No political project I can think of has ever worked like that. Come forward, comrades, you will be worse off. It's just not going to happen. So you have to find ways of inspiring people and making it clear to people that the move to the zero carbon economy is going to make them better off. Or we find technology that does it without involving personal sacrifice. I think there is a sort of hair shirt part of the kind of environmental movement which is alienating to people because it just doesn't resonate with their lives, because they're already looking at their own lives and thinking, Jesus, I barely can make ends meet as it is. I can't sacrifice anything more. I don't have time to sacrifice more. I think it's a real problem. We're not going to get out of the climate change crisis by stopping growing. We have to grow in the correct way. Fiona is in Kendal. Fiona, afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for covering this, Lewis. But just listening to what you've just said, like the whole project neoliberalism hasn't worked, has it? Because look where we've got to. As you've just rightly said, people haven't got enough money, people are suffering, there's crap in our rivers, we could just go on and on and on. So it's not working. Why do you want to do more of the same?
I didn't say do more of the same, but I think also we have to take the big picture, which is to say, neoliberalism is a sort of a catch-all term, but let's use it for the sake of argument. It's also true to say that the hydrocarbon economy, the extraction of fossil fuels, has led to the industrialization and the eradication of poverty in many parts of the world. If it wasn't for the fossil fuel economy, we would not have the sort of standard of living that we have now.
But do you remember, Lewis, when they used to use lead on people's faces to give them like a white effect, and then they realised it was killing them, so they had to stop? And there's a kind of history of the human race working out that things were killing them.
Of course.
So what's actually happening now is the burning of fossil fuels is killing us. This economy, the way we measure our economy, is killing us. And so you were talking about nobody's going to give up anything because they want to keep going. If we keep going, our children are going to die. Now, just before you dismiss me as a, eco-zealot or whatever it is that the media like to do.
I wouldn't have done that.
The Institute, thank you. That's really nice of you. Thank you. Sorry. The Institute of Actuaries. Now, can you get any more right in the thick of the economy people than actuaries? They are predicting billions of deaths if we carry on like this. Insurance companies are no longer insuring people's houses. We've watched what happened in LA. We've watched what happened in Spain, in Valencia. They were people who talked like you've been talking today. They've been saying things like, we can't give up anything. We can't. Look what happens to
What would you propose, Fiona? What would you propose we give up? What do you think? What would your non-neoliberal economy look like?
Well, let's just start with what people would be prepared to give up for their kids. I'm a grandma, and I'd be prepared to give up so much if I thought my granddaughter wasn't going to be just about everything. I'd be living in a smaller house. I already have. I'm a supporter of Just Stop Oil. I'm doing all I can. I've been arrested 3 times. And when your question is, what can we do? What we can do is get together and say to our government, stop arguing about Rosebank and Jackdaw.
But we need to keep the light. But in the
they shouldn't be
meantime,
open.
we need to keep the lights on, and we need to keep the heating on. And in order to do that, we have to continue to extract fossil fuels until we transition away from them.
Absolutely,
and it's a process.
But the transition has to be fast, really fast. And in order to do that, we have to insulate houses. We have to reduce the cost of public transport. I mean, I was reading about somebody who went to Spain, flew to Spain for a bottle of olive oil, and he did it for under a tenner. I mean, what a world are we living in where air fuel is cheaper than going on the train? And so we need to invest in that, and we need to get on with investing billions in renewables. And the other thing is our economy. We need to measure GDP differently, and we need an international treaty. So what Starmer should be doing, instead of pretending that Rosebank is a good idea, he needs to get his act together and actually stop supporting fossil fuels and invest everything.
Would you support
in
nuclear?
renewables.
What about nuclear reactors?
Nuclear reactors, yes, they're a barrel of laughs, aren't they? Huge problems.
But we do need power. But we do need energy.
Lewis,
But I'm just saying, Fiona, we do need energy when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. We do need that. Nuclear is one way to do it.
We need to reduce our energy consumption.
But why?
We do.
Because we need the industries of the future. The industries of the future, like AI, actually require more electricity. We've got to surely be able to advance, haven't we? We've got to surely be able to do 2 things at once. We can't regress.
Advance and progression is how we've got to where we are. We have to.
What you mean?
slow down.
Lifting billions of people out of poverty around the world? That's a good thing, isn't it?
We need better quality lives. We need to be slower and calmer.
Well,
our mental health would
people in
improve.
India, people in China, people in Africa who've been lifted out of poverty as a result of the extraction of fossil fuels. They've got better lives.
If we invested fully in renewables, you're talking about countries that have got so much sunshine. It's ridiculous that they're burning more oil than fuel. And anyway, this is life or death, Lewis. One day, Lewis, you won't be able to get into your studio because of a fire, a wildfire, or floods. That's a fact. The Institute of Actuaries are saying that.
Okay,
It's
Fiona.
not me.
Okay, grateful to you, Fiona. Enjoy the conversation. Margaret is in Croydon. Margaret.
Hello, Lewis.
Hello.
I'd like to offer a slightly different approach, a cognitive science approach, in terms of how we frame things with the language we use.
Yes.
So, first of all, it's not climate change, it's global warming. And that takes us right out of is it, isn't it discourse. Secondly, these types of huge physics systems are what we call hyperobjects. They're way beyond anything you can apprehend with your senses and perception, which you can apprehend climate with. And so I think when we actually start talking about global warming, we need to actually be using the correct terminology, which would then allow us to build non-divisive solutions and options. Secondly, I think using words like existential is not helpful at all, because it's not humans that are going to disappear. It's civilization as we know it, if we do nothing. And we know we're way beyond 2 degrees anyway. So I think all of this, let's pretend it's not, beyond that. It's just deluding ourselves. But I'd like to just suggest that perhaps what we need to do is understand that we have limitations with our human cognitive apparatus in apprehending the full scale of these hyperobjects and the full temporal dynamics of these huge systems. And so that which then demands of us collective action. And it's only as in collective action and with utilizing multiple individual brains coming together to build these vast models and taking measurements right around the world that we're able to understand then what is going on. And that's my suggestion for a more productive kind of conversation. And I don't think we should be putting this in terms of an either or. I believe we can find and I also think that it's only technology that is going to make a difference is also a delusion.
Okay, Margaret, grateful to you.
Multiple perspectives, but
Margaret, grateful to you. I want to get Liam in Manchester in for the final word on this and word for the show today. Liam.
Hi, I think something that's often not considered, especially when you're thinking about growth,
is the forecast of loss of GDP on a long scale relating to climate change. I mean, if you look at the World Economic Forum, it's said a roughly middling level of temperature increase. You're looking at potentially 14% of world GDP loss by 2050. And then, that could go up to 18% at some of your worst case scenarios. And especially, with places like the US now nagging on the Paris Climate Change Agreement, these things could happen. And we've got this constant obsession with growth, but these will be, permanent, huge-scale recessions. COVID led to about a 6.5% loss.
But we have
GDP.
to have growth to keep wealth growing in order to be able to give people a decent standard of living. I mean, the way people talk about growth sometimes is as if it's just, only billionaires who benefit from growth. That's not true. The economy is jaundiced at the moment, but it's not true. We do need to keep living standards rising.
No, I absolutely agree. What I'm saying is not doing anything with regards to climate change will have a huge opposite effect. It will lead to economic loss.
Liam, I'm grateful to you. Ran out of time, I'm afraid. Well, that was uplifting, wasn't it, everybody? Should we do it again tomorrow? If you missed any of today's show, you can, of course, listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including The News Agents, which I'm off to record right now. And we've been carrying on James O'Brien Daily whilst James is away. The best bits of this show in 60 minutes every day. Download now for free from our App Store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's the always uplifting Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you very much indeed.
James O'Brien on LBC.